I was about 13 years old on my way to school one day in Athens, Greece, the place where I was born, and a biplane of the Greek Air Force flew overhead and began to do the most astonishing acrobatics. And it was so beautiful, so wonderful, that I got not only fascinated, but beyond that. And as the airplane finished doing the acrobatics over this area, and I began to walk on my way to school, I said to myself right then, that's it. When I grow up, I'm going to become a military aviator and nothing else. From then on, books and school meant nothing to me. All I wanted was to really look at the airplanes. And I began to skip school and walk some 25 kilometers to the aerodrome to watch the airplanes fly. I was dreaming, of course, when I got to age, to try to get into the Greek Air Force Academy. So just before I reached my 18th birthday, I investigated to find out what the exams would be all about, and I found out that I wasn't even qualified to be outside the building. Why? Because I was a third-class student. I knew nothing about history or math or things like that. Then when I discovered that I was not going to be able to make the Greek Air Force Academy, I said to myself, I'm going to leave Greece and go to America to learn to fly. I had just passed my 18th birthday. I joined the Greek Merchant Marine. A month later, after that, I had a job on a 10,000-ton freighter as an assistant fireman. And on the 25th of March, 1938, that vessel left Greece for destination unknown. The only thing we knew that was we were going to Oran, Algeria, in the Mediterranean to pick up a load of iron ore for either Cardiff or Baltimore. These two names, didn't mean a thing to me. What I knew about America was Chicago with the gangsters, New York, and Hollywood, where the movies are made. So we left Oran after the load, and one of the firemen who I was helping, I asked him, I said, where is this Cardiff or Baltimore? Well, he said, Cardiff is in England, and another vessel is going to take a load for Cardiff, but we're going to Baltimore. And I said, where is Baltimore? Oh, it's in America. He said, not too far away from New York. When I heard that not too far away from New York, I became so excited. Of course, I didn't really show my excitement. We were crossing the Atlantic Ocean. We ran into a storm. And I began to ask this fellow here, the fireman, tell me, do you know anything about Baltimore, this Baltimore you're talking about? Oh, he said, I was with another freighter many years ago, and one of the crew members, after we landed in Baltimore, one of the crew members wanted to visit New York to see his uncle. Oh, so we took the train from Baltimore and went to New York. But I said, how did you do that? You don't speak English. You don't need to speak English. The only thing you need to know is ticket for New York. Oh, I said, what do you mean, ticket for New York? Well, he said, that's when you go to the counter at the station and you buy your ticket and you board the train and you go to New York. Thank you very much. I didn't show any excitement. But it's funny, here I am in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, going through a doggone storm, and I'm shoveling coal and say to myself, ticket for New York, ticket for New York. Try to memorize those words. It took me all day to walk through the city of Baltimore and locate the railway tracks so I can find my way to the station. I made it. It was about 3 o'clock. When I got to the counter, I followed some people. After I asked a man in uniform, I said to the guy, ticket for New York. And he pointed, the little window. So I went to that little window and I threw my $7. I had $7 left now. I threw my $7 and I told the man like I knew exactly what I was saying. Ticket for New York. He got me the ticket. He took $3, I think, and gave me some change and pushed the other money to me. I arrived in New York in darkness. I came out on 34th Street and 8th Avenue. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I spotted the Greek and the American flag cross the avenue. I couldn't figure out what the Greek flag was doing in this country. So I dashed across and I almost got hit by a car. And I found out that it was a small movie house playing the first movie ever made in Greece. And a movie that I had seen in Athens, all of us had seen it, The Shepherd's Daughter, Voskopula in Greek. I looked at the thing and I admired those black and white pictures that they had the old days. And all of a sudden, a miracle. And you think that movie with Edmund Gwynn, Miracle on 34th Street, took place on 34th Street? The miracle took place on 8th Avenue with me. Two Greek fellows just stopped behind me, about maybe 2 feet away from me, and they began to talk in Greek. One was saying, now what do the Greeks know about making movies? And the other fellow said, now look, let's go inside and have a look at it. And if we don't like it, we just, come out and go home. It was then when I intervened and joined the conversation. And I said to the elder fellow, I said, what is it you want to know about this movie? Well, he said, when it came here, so I saw this movie in Athens. In Athens, he said, and what are you doing here? The way you're dressed up looked like you came out from a goddamn ship. I said, I did. I told him what I had done, and I told him that I didn't want to go back to the ship. I wanted to stay in this country, and I want to become an aviator. And my God, he said, I told him, I was hoping to find a Greek church, No, he said, the Greek church can't help you. He said, we are brothers. He said, this is my young brother, and we live in Brooklyn. And he said, you come with us. And that was the miracle that really helped me, when I arrived here in the country. Christos, he was, by the way, a chef at a restaurant in Brooklyn, but he got me a job in a bakery on 147th Street and Broadway. I would say about 4 months later or 5 months later, I discovered a flying school at Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, New York. They would teach you how to fly, and you do not have to really attend there on daily classes. You flew at your leisure time, and it was perfect for me. I devoted quite a bit of time there, and I began to fly the J-3 Cub, a little baby aircraft that travels some 65 miles an hour. I was on my way, on my day off, on my way to do some flying. And I was so mad because the day before, I had seen in the paper where the Germans were killing the Greeks all over Athens and stealing olive oil to take it back to Germany, and mix it with some chemicals to produce lubricants for the aircraft. And I was really furious. And I got to the airport there, and my instructor, Johnny Hilton, he said, Steve, he said, what's wrong with you? He said, something is wrong. And I told him, what I said in the paper, and I said, if I could only, get there, I said, I want to fight the Germans, and you really want to fight the Germans? I said, yes, Johnny, I'll give anything. He said, how would you like to join the Royal Air Force? I said, what? I can't go to England to join. No. He said, right here, the Royal Air Force is recruiting American civilian pilots. But Johnny, I said, I'm not an American. I told him that I had tried to join the Army and at the recruiting office in New York, and the guy, threw me out the office. Oh, he says, you're a Greek subject, he said, and the RAF, Greece is fighting with the RAF, and they take you. I was sent to Polaris Flight Academy in Glendale, California, where I was trained the military way to fly the aircraft. Polaris Flight Academy was on one of the 3 or 4 schools the RAF had recruited, or rather contracted, to train civilian pilots for the Royal Air Force. I spent about 3 months there, receiving about 90 hours in military aircraft. All the aircraft we had there were marked. They had the markings of U.S. Army Air Force aircraft. And upon graduation, I was in a class of 15 of us. 7 of us were appointed as sergeant pilots, and the other 8 as pilot officers, equivalent to a second lieutenant. I was one of the appointed pilot officers. In February 42, we left the U.S. through Canada, and we went to England. In England, I was sent to a pilot officers school to learn about officers, and above all to learn how to salute, really. And after that, I was sent to an operational training unit to learn how to fight in air, combat flying, that is. We had Hurricanes and P-51 Mustangs, with the early Mustang with the Allison engine. And upon graduation from that school, I was sent to a fighter squadron, 268 Fighter Squadron at Newmarket, close to Cambridge. I began to fly in combat missions over Holland. And primarily what we were doing, strafing locomotives, trains, and anything that appeared to be military. And there, at the squadron, I had another problem. The Greek Air Force in exile, stationed in England, was trying to recruit pilots for a Spitfire squadron in Egypt. And one day I got a telephone call from this wing commander, Kinatos, who asked me to visit him in London at the Claridge Hotel. I visited the hotel, and he revealed to me that they were trying to locate escaped Greek pilots. Some of them had gone to Egypt, some of them to Cyprus, Malta, and some of them in England. And they had no way of trying to contact them, and of course, who had escaped. So what they did, they went to the Air Ministry and asked the officials there to look at the roster of active RAF pilots. And it was then how they intercepted my name. I told the wing commander that, I said, sir, I don't want to go to Egypt. I want to stay in England and fight the Germans from here. But he said, you can't do that. You're a Greek subject. And, your duty is, I said, no, sir. I said, I left Greece, and my intention is when the war is over and I can make it, if I make it, survive, that is, I'd like to go back to America to become an American. No, he says, and I remember he said, I don't know what the king will say about this. King George II was also living at the same hotel, and evidently he was behind this recruitment. So, not knowing what to do, I sought the help of squadron leader Chesley Peterson, the commander of the 71 Eagle Squadron. And I called Pete, and we met in London, and I told him exactly what the Greek Air Force in exile was trying to do to me. And Pete said, do you want to go to Egypt? I said, no, sir, I want to stay here. Okay. He said, I'm going to Fighter Command, and I'm going to try to talk to them to see if I can get you out of 268 Squadron into my squadron, which he did. It's amazing. It's been 4 years since I came to America, and here I am now flying with the Royal Air Force, one of the greatest air forces in the world, against Germany. But then we had a problem, because when Uncle Sam came over to England with the 8th Air Force, their aim was to recruit or to take every American who was flying in the Royal Air Force, especially the 3 Eagle squadrons, the 71, 121, and 133. And the reason was that the generals, particularly General Spaatz, he was looking at it, and he saw that there were 245 Americans with a PhD in aerial combat. And that would have been really a tremendous gift, to go to Uncle Sam. So anyway, preparations were made for the transfer, and I told Chesley Peterson, who was now in charge of the transfer of the 3 Eagle squadrons into the Army Air Force, I told him that, sir, I said, this is not for me, because I'm not an American. He said, they need you too. General Spaatz told me that they want every one of us, and you're included. So here I am. I was transferred into the Army Air Force at the end of September, beginning of October 1942, without being an American. On the 3rd of May, 1943, I was on a training flight with with my roommate, Don Gentili. And I was called to immediately pancake. Pancake in the RAF terminology and also in the Army Air Force then means land. Just come back and land, pancake. So they called me and they told me that I was to pancake immediately. So I left my training site there and I returned to the base and I landed. And as I parked my P-47, I saw Lieutenant Colonel Peterson with my squadron commander, Tommy Andrews, in his staff car. After I jumped down from the aircraft, I went over and I saluted and I said to Colonel Peterson, I said, why did they call me for my training flight? He said, get in the car. We got on the car and he began to drive to his office. And he asked me what I thought about the Thunderbolt. And in my mind, immediately I went back and thought of the Greek authorities. I said to myself, they have gone to the Americans and told the Americans that this guy is a Greek subject, not an American, and that he belongs to the Greek Air Force. Oh my God, we got to his office and he asked me to sit down opposite his office. He got on the phone and he said, this is Colonel Peterson, connect me with the embassy. Oh my God, I said, evidently he has no guts to tell me about it. And he wants someone from the embassy to tell me that I cannot stay in the American Air Force. So I said, I began to really, not cry, but I felt really kind of down. And here is old Colonel Peterson telling the ambassador when he answered the phone, John, Pitt here. I got the lieutenant right here, and I think you better tell him. Oh my God, I said to myself, they're going to tell me that I cannot stay in the American Air Force. He gave me the phone, and as I tried to put the phone, close to my face there, I said, yes, sir, this is Lieutenant Pisanos. He said, young man, how would you like to become an American citizen here in London today? I think I stopped breathing. And I said, but I said, I was hoping when I returned to America. No. He says, we're going to naturalize you as an American here in London. And you better just get down here as soon as possible. And in the meantime, I looked at my squadron commander there, Chesley Peterson. He was laughing while he was trying to light his pipe. The ceremony was going to take place that afternoon, and it was a wonderful ceremony. More generals, more war correspondents. Walter Cronkite was there, Ed Morrow was there, and God knows who else. And after the ceremony, I remember the man from the immigration told the audience, may I present to you Lieutenant Steve Pisanos, the first individual ever to become an American citizen for the first time in American history outside the continental limits of the U.S. You have no idea how proud I was. I think I was crying all over the place. So we began to fly now with the P-47. We were ready, combat ready, and we began to escort the bombers further and further into Germany. I had my first victory on the 21st of May, 1943. I sat down an FW-190 over at Belgium. My group commander, a fellow by the name Don Blexley, Colonel Don Blexley, who passed away last year, he wanted to have an aircraft to to really go to Berlin, as far as Berlin, escorting the bombers. And that aircraft turned out to be the P-51 Mustang. And I took part in escorting missions, 800 bombers, 500 fighters, 1,000 bombers, 600 fighters. And I took part on the first Berlin escort mission on the 3rd of March 1944. Then on the 5th of March 1944, we had an escort mission down to Bordeaux, France, on the southern part of France. We were to take a bunch, two groups of B-24s, while they were to bomb 2 air bases the Luftwaffe was using, with Ju-88s flying over the Atlantic and bombing convoys. And I guess the bomber boys want to destroy these 2 bases. Anyway, over Bordeaux, we got mixed up with a bunch of FW-190s and ME-109s. I got a credit for 4 destroyed that day. But on the way back, I was flying alone, and I was coming up at about 22,000 feet, and I knew that the way my engine was operating, I wasn't going to make it down to the English Channel and bail out over the channel and be picked up by the RAF later on. And just before I came up over Le Havre, my engine just gave up. I didn't want to bail out high because of the fear the Germans might shoot at me. So what I did, after I had released the canopy and unbuckled myself there, I tried to stand up. There is a cord that is connected to the dinghy you are sitting on it. You connect that cord to your May West. The cord, I tried to pull it left and right, nothing. I said, sit down again. Panicking, of course, you know. So I sat down back in the cockpit, and I played the cord back and forth, here, there, you know. Finally, it got unplugged there. And I connected it to the May West, you know. There was no need now because I was over land. I wasn't going to use my dinghy. And then I stood up again, and I got out on the left wing. And it was then when I looked ahead, and I can see cows, you know, all over the countryside. And I was about maybe 300-400 feet above the ground. I knew that I could really bail out and have a parachute open. I thought for a moment, I thought of trying to get back in the cockpit, but I was fearful that with my parachute all over me, I would disturb the stick and possibly, you know, kill myself. So I stood right there holding at the left longeron there. And then funny, the aircraft was coming over the top of a barn. And it was then when I just reached inside with my right hand and pulled the stick back, barely missing the barn. And as I came over the other side, the right wing, dropped to the right, and I was thrown on the left. When I came to it and I decided to put fire on the aircraft, 2 German soldiers, evidently they had spotted the aircraft coming down. They came after me and they began to fire their automatic weapons. Trembling and ready to light a match that I had taken from my escape kit and mix my scarf that I had dipped into the tank with the parachute from my parachute. The 2 German soldiers began to fire, you know, and I thought they were trying to scare me more or less, visualizing that maybe I would damage the aircraft. It was when the bullets hit the vertical stabilizer of my aircraft that then I said they mean to kill me. I dropped everything and I ran into the forest. They came in the forest, and I think that's what I lost them. And funny, when I came out of the forest and I spotted my crashed aircraft, not burning, it was not really burned, thank God. And I spotted my aircraft there. I jumped a barbed wire and I came out to a paved road. And I began to walk down that paved road, and I came out a bend there, the motorcycle. There was a motorcycle. The 2 gentlemen had arrived on the scene. Anyway, scared that maybe other Germans will come in, I jumped another barbed wire and I went the opposite direction. For 5 days, I wandered all over the countryside with an injured shoulder. I finally made contact with the underground. They picked me up. They brought me to a point, and I had a problem with them. I still had to convince them so they can check with London who exactly I was, because they had a problem. The underground in France at the time had a problem. Before the war, there was a group of American German families with children, grown-up children, who went to Germany to visit relatives. The war started and they were trapped there. What did the Gestapo do? Picked up those young fellows, young 18, 20-year-old guys, and recruit them as Gestapo agents. I was told a story how a B-17 with American markings was flying one day, and there were parachutes coming out of the B-17, imitating that the aircraft were damaged. Those guys in the parachutes were not Americans, they were German agents. And he told me one story how they intercepted this guy, and he had not given them the proper information. For example, when they asked me my name, my rank, my serial number, that was not enough. Because the Germans with the dog tags, they can really imitate an individual. They wanted to know my father's name, where I was born, where I went to school. Over and above that, there's 3 items there. They want to know my squadron commander's name. So it was then, when I gave them all this information they wanted, and they went to London and found out who I was. And I'll never forget the day he came into my room with a bottle of Bordeaux wine. So, Stefan, he said, you're the Flying Greek. I never told him anything about the Flying Greek, but in the RAF, in the Army Air Force, I was known as the Greek. The Greek. In combat, instead using my call sign, Greek, let's go get this guy. Greek, turn around. Greek, come over, and this and that. After I spent about 10 days with this individual, it was decided that I was going to Paris. They moved me to Paris on a truck loaded with firewood. The driver, we were up in the front cabin, the driver here, me in the middle, and another Frenchman here who spoke good French, good English, and he was a gendarme, a policeman for the countryside, but in civilian clothes, of course. And we conversed everything. So on the way to Paris, we were stopped by 2 German soldiers. One of them around a bend. We went through a small town. The truck was proceeding very slowly. So this German soldier pulled the Luger and he came up and pointed at the driver to stop. They want to bomb a ride to Paris. That they want. But when I saw them, my heart, just went up. So anyway, with the 2 German soldiers now sitting at the top of the firewood, my friend here revealed to me, he said, underneath the firewood, beaucoup mitraillettes, many machine guns and other weapons, hand grenades, the RAF had dropped during the night for the resistance in Paris. Now, how do you get those things in the front of the Germans? The truck was just the perfect alibi. Because on the way to Paris, we passed by German patrol vehicles, German staff cars, and, the fear was still with me, that we'll be stopped and say, who is this young fellow that you're transferring? But we had good insurance with the 2 soldiers, at the top of the fire truck. Anyway, in Paris, I spent about 6 months, and I lived with 16 different families. The last family, of course, was really wonderful. Those guys were the biggest saboteurs I joined with, and we did some sabotaging. We ambushed a convoy one night with another group northeast of Paris, and they gave me an automatic Brent weapon there to use, and I must have really killed about 6 Germans that night. Paris was liberated, okay, and as I said, and several hundred, 700-800 of us came out from hiding. We were taken back to England. And upon reporting back to my station there, they were glad to see me, of course. And I was told that no more combat for me because I knew too much about the underground and operations in France. And they felt that if I had been sat down again, if I had gone down in France, the Gestapo had means, of really making me talk. Anyway, so then it was decided that I had to return back to the States, and that's when I was assigned to Wright Field. at Wright Field. I went through test pilot school. We had captured German aircraft there, the Messerschmitt 109, the FW-190, the Me-262, including the Japanese Zero. And I did quite a bit testing and open graduation from the test pilot school. My roommate from the war days, Don Giantelli, he and I were selected to do the service test of the YP-80 here at Newark, California. I was testing a P-63 one day, I remember, over Cincinnati, 35,000 feet, and I got into trouble. The engine exploded on me, and I had to dead stick the aircraft with the gear down at the right field. I locked both wheels. I landed halfway down the runway, and I locked both wheels, and both wheels caught fire. And the fire trucks and the ambulance that were really following me, after I jumped the aircraft off the runway, jumped from the aircraft, as I rolled off the runway, the firemen there with the foam, covered my whole body, my eyes and everything. They took me to the hospital, and it was then when a pilot from the bomber section, a TWA guy on military leave, was trying to recruit pilots from Wright Field. He came over the hospital after all my friends had come over to see me what happened. Giantelli and Yeager and Dick Bong and Gabi Gabreski also too. They came over to see what had happened to me, and after they left, this TWA guy came in and he said, "Hey buddy, I have a B-26 and I'm going to Kansas City. That's the headquarters for TWA. And I need a co-pilot." He said, "How about it?" I said, "Jimmy, I'll come with you." I felt that, I survived the war. Maybe it's the time for me to get out like so many of us were leaving the service. But then I got disappointed with TWA. I felt that the airline game was not really for me. And I wanted to get back on active duty, and I didn't have 2 years of college like the Air Force required then. And I was on a flight to LaGuardia through Washington, D.C., and my friend Giantelli was at the Pentagon. So he met me at National, and we had coffee together. I told him that I was unhappy about TWA and the airline game, and he said, "Would you like to get back on active duty?" I said, "But how can I do that? I have no 2 years of college." "Yeah, but," he said, "you got something the Air Force will give anything to have you." I said, "What?" "Jet time." I had over 100 hours of jet test time. And at that time, the jet pilots in the Air Force can be counted on your hands, on your fingers. And so he said, "Look, when you get back to Kansas City, I'll send you an application for recall to active duty. Complete that, but don't send it through channels. You send it to me." I did that. 10 days later, I had orders from the Pentagon by direction of the president to report back on active duty. I went to the Pentagon. I spent about 4 years there. I got a regular commission. I got promoted to major. And from there, I had assignments with Germany and with NATO in Italy, and back to Colorado Springs with headquarters Air Defense Command and NORAD and Norton Air Force Base. Then back to Germany again in 1964. When my tour was over at 67, I volunteered from Germany to go to Vietnam. I thought I was going to have a divorce in my hands, because when I went home and I told my wife, she said, "Why did you do that?" I told her that I felt that America was in a bind, and being a man of the military, I should be there. So finally she saw my light. I spent a year in Vietnam supporting the Special Forces camps in the jungles of Vietnam with the Caribou, a 2-engine aircraft. I flew 375 missions in Vietnam. I was given command of my squadron, and after I left Vietnam to come home, I was notified that I had been promoted to colonel, full colonel, and that I was to proceed to Little Rock Air Force Base to be deputy commander for an ICBM wing. It was really unbelievable. I spent about 2.5 years there, learning. They sent me to school, of course, for 3 months. learning about the ICBM machines that carry the atomic bomb, aiming every one of those missiles that I was in charge, 18 silos, every one of those missiles was aiming at the Soviet Union. And of course, those buggers, had the same thing on us. But the bombs we had on those missiles were not the baby bombs we had dropped in Japan. They were the hydrogen bombs. One of those bombs in Moscow would have wiped the whole goddamn city. It was there at that assignment when a colonel from the Colonels and Generals Assignment Office at the Pentagon called me up and he said, Pisanos, how would you like to go to Athens, Greece and be the chief of the Air Force mission? I thought somebody was holding my leg, being promoted to colonel, and now I told the guy, I said, what are you trying to pull my leg? Or something? No, he said, I'm not pulling any legs. He said, he repeated his name, Colonel Tolman, and he was in charge. And he said, I told my personnel people to give me a colonel, a fighter pilot background, Vietnam background, who can speak Greek. And the only card that pops out on the IBM machine is Pisanos. So that's why he said we picked you up. Anyway, I left the Air Force, the ICBM wing, and we went to Athens, Greece on a diplomatic passport. What America did for me, I treasure deep in my heart. I never dared to dream that someday I would be wearing the uniforms of two great air forces, the British Royal Air Force and the Army Air Force, and later on the United States Air Force, where I attained the rank of a colonel. That I would complete 3 distinguished military schools, accumulating some 8,000 flying hours in some 85 different types of aircraft, prop-driven and jet-propelled aircraft, including a fighter, the F-106. Yes, I was able to really achieve and accomplish all this with the opportunity given to me by Uncle Sam and the American people. And my gratitude to this great country is too great to express in words how I feel in my heart.
He may be the only person in history who fell in love with flight because President Calvin Coolidge took a vacation. A baby-faced Swede who flew a trainer in a loop around the center span of the Golden Gate Bridge. He was a stunningly talented pilot. It was said of him that he thought more quickly in 3 dimensions than most people did in 2. His string of combat victories over New Guinea turned him into a national hero. He shot down an incredible 40 enemy aircraft before being removed from combat once and for all. A national treasure who could no longer be risked on the battlefield. When the endless cycle of parades and war bond rallies wore him down, he asked for and received assignment as a test pilot in the secret program that produced America's first combat jet. He is Richard Ira Bong, and he is a legend of air power. Richard Ira Bong was born September 24, 1920 in Superior, Wisconsin. Superior is a small town at the western tip of Lake Superior and about as far north as you can be in Wisconsin without being in Minnesota. His father, Carl, had come to the United States from Sweden at the age of 7. He worked his way halfway across the continent before settling as a farmer in Poplar, Wisconsin, 20 miles to the southeast of Superior. Carl Bong married Dora Bryce and settled in to start a family. Richard was the first of their 9 children, a quiet, thoughtful boy who grew up hunting and fishing in the dense forests around his family's farm. Known from an early age as Dick, he was first taken with aviation at the age of 8, when President Calvin Coolidge decided to spend a summer vacation in Superior.
And every day the mail would be delivered by a courier, air courier, and Richard saw the plane going over it every day, and I think it just fascinated him, and I think that was the start of his love affair with aviation, and it just built from there.
When the presidential party left town, so did the air couriers, but aviation had made its impression on young Dick. He contented himself with building model airplanes and dreaming of the day when he would learn how to fly. He played basketball, baseball, and hockey. He was a fisherman and hunter, played clarinet in the school band, and was active in the local 4-H club. He was, like almost everyone else in Poplar, a Lutheran, and he sang tenor in the choir every Sunday morning at Bethany Lutheran Church. Poplar was a town so small that its high school only lasted 3 years. To complete his senior year and make himself eligible for college and the civilian pilot training program, he commuted 44 miles round trip every day to Superior. In 1938, he graduated 18th in a class of more than 400. He attended Superior State Teachers College and enlisted in the civilian pilot training program. That government-sponsored flight training system was designed to boost the number of experienced pilots in the United States. The government justified the program based on the growing need for airmail and commercial pilots. In reality, the government's main concerns were the wars that were brewing in Europe and Asia. There was going to come a time, military planners believed, when the United States would need a lot of pilots quickly. Bong earned his pilot's license in a Piper J3, and almost from the first showed a gift for aviation.
He had a knack for it, and he learned that through the pilot training programs he had been in college and afterwards, that he was just a natural pilot, and that was the word that everybody used to describe him in all of his pilot training programs. He was just a natural pilot. He loved it, and it became evident in the performance he turned in as a pilot.
In 1941, Bong enlisted in the Army Air Aviation Cadet Program. In May, he shipped out to far-off and exotic California. He did his primary flight training in a Stearman biplane outside Tulare. He caught on quickly and moved on to flying Vultee BT-13s, the famous Vultee vibrator at Garner Field in Taft.
He was, as I said, a natural pilot. He had natural skills, natural abilities, and in those days, you didn't get a whole lot of instructions.
Most of the pilots at Gardner simply flew, running up their hours and getting a feel for maneuvering in 3 dimensions. Bong quickly distinguished himself and was ordered to report for gunnery training. At Luke Field near Phoenix, Arizona, he moved from the BT-13 to the AT-6, a single-engine fighter trainer that was smoother and more capable than the Vultees he'd been flying, but sluggish compared to real combat fighters. His gunnery trainer was Captain Barry Goldwater, the future senator and presidential candidate. Goldwater, a tough, precise teacher, said later that Bong was a talented pilot. In those years, hunting with his Winchester rifle in Wisconsin had honed his shooting skills. But Bong really proved himself one afternoon in an informal, impromptu hassle high over Luke Field. Bong, flying an AT-6, squared off against a Czech pilot in a P-38. The dogfight should have been a mismatch. The P-38, after all, was much faster and more agile than the AT-6, and the Czech pilot had hundreds of hours more flight time than Bong. But no matter how the P-38 pilot maneuvered, he couldn't keep Bong off his tail. The two would square off, and in a few seconds, Bong would be closing in on the P-38 from behind. The Czech pilot, upon landing, pronounced Bong the best natural pilot he had ever seen. Bong was at Luke when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Like the other pilots, he wanted into the war as soon as he could get there. A month later, he received his wings and his officer's commission. But rather than sending him into combat, the Army kept him at Luke as a gunnery instructor. Dick Bong's war seemed to end before it had started. For almost 6 months after the American entry into World War II, Second Lieutenant Dick Bong was stuck stateside. As a gunnery instructor at Luke Field in Arizona, he trained other young fighter pilots and then watched as they departed for points unknown overseas. In May 1942, however, the Army Air Force assigned Bong to Hamilton Field in San Francisco. There, pilots were learning how to fly the new Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter. The P-38s were big, fast, and had proven themselves unsuitable for combat in Europe. The cooling systems for the plane's twin engines froze up at low temperatures common at altitudes over Europe. The pilots training in P-38s at Hamilton all understood where they were headed: the Pacific. After arriving at Hamilton, Bong quickly came to the attention of Major General George C. Kenney, commanding general of the 4th Air Force. Bong was both a gifted pilot and an incorrigible hot dog. On training flights, he liked to dip down low and buzz San Francisco's downtown. Showing off for the civilians seemed to be his greatest joy in life, and it got so bad that General Kenney put out an official order that such antics would not be tolerated.
Well, as most pilots are prone to do, he disregarded that instruction and, in fact, went out and did a couple loops around the middle span of the Golden Gate Bridge, went down Market Street waving at the secretaries as he was buzzing through town, and had gotten so low that evidently it blew down somebody's laundry. And that woman actually filed a complaint with General Kenney.
Kenney knew, of course, that Bong's juvenile clowning was not altogether a bad sign. There's a long tradition of cocky fighter pilots indulging their whims. Indeed, Kenney knew that confidence and spirit were traits necessary for fighter pilots to survive in combat. Still, he was a general, and generals have to at least attempt to keep a lid on their pilots. He disciplined Bong regularly, making him wash, dry, and fold the laundry he had blown off the clothesline, for example. But he also took note of the young pilot's enormous skills in the air.
He actually spotted the spark, I think, when he called him on the carpet in his office. I don't know what he was expecting when this pilot walked in the door, but here comes this, average size 5'8", blonde-haired, baby-faced Swede who appeared to be scared to death that he was going to lose his wings.
Bong's passion for flight so impressed Kenney that when General Douglas MacArthur chose Kenney to set up the 5th Air Force Base in the Southwest Pacific, Kenney made sure that Bong was one of the first pilots sent to his new base in Australia. He arrived in September, springtime in the Southern Hemisphere. For more than a month, Bong sat around in Brisbane awaiting delivery of his plane. In November, Kenney assigned him to temporary duty with the 35th Fighter Group based in Port Moresby, New Guinea. New Guinea at the time was a hornet's nest of Japanese aircraft. MacArthur's campaign to reclaim the Philippines had just begun. American forces were beginning the bloody harbor-to-harbor conquest of New Guinea. The Japanese were throwing everything they could at the arriving American forces. The Army Air Force used a kind of sink-or-swim training method, throwing green pilots into the periphery of battles to ready them for full-fledged air combat. Flying under the careful tutelage of an experienced combat pilot, Captain Tom Lynch, Bong flew long patrols and skirted air battles for nearly a month, learning from Lynch the best tactics for fighting in a P-38. Then, on December 27, 1942, Bong got his first real taste of battle. He was in a flight of 12 P-38s led by Lynch. The flight intercepted 40 Japanese aircraft over Buma on New Guinea's northwest coast. Badly outnumbered, the P-38s charged headlong into the formation. Bong showed no sign of the fear he surely felt. He scored a Zero fighter and a Val bomber. Altogether, the P-38s knocked down a dozen Japanese aircraft. Bong, who had never been in real combat before, earned a Silver Star for his actions. From that point on, in dependable, almost unspectacular fashion, Bong began to compile what turned out to be the finest combat record in the history of American aviation. It took him only until January to become an ace, scoring his 5th kill over Leh Harbor. In February, Bong left Lynch's shadow and returned to the 9th Fighter Squadron. On March 3rd, on the opening day of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Bong flew escort for a flight of B-25 and B-17 bombers attacking a Japanese convoy. Bong knocked down a Zero. The bombers sank 4 Japanese destroyers and 8 transports. 1 and 2 kills at a time, Bong upped his total. Kenny promoted him to first lieutenant and gave him a 2-week leave in Australia. By then, a double ace, Bong enjoyed his R&R but longed to get back into action. The Japanese were throwing thousands of aircraft at the advancing Allies, creating aces almost as fast as the Allies could get pilots into the air. But Bong, perhaps uniquely among American pilots, seemed more interested in the experience and challenge of flight than he was in his kill count.
He was an introvert on the ground, shy even. In the air, became a different person, became the ultimate fighter pilot.
On July 26, Bong had his best day ever. Escorting American bombers attacking Lae, he knocked down 4 Japanese fighters. General Kenny, who had been so impressed by Bong's skills in training, could barely believe how proficient a warrior the unassuming Swede had become. He put Bong in for a promotion to captain and filed an after-action report that resulted in Bong receiving the Distinguished Service Cross. Bong was, in fact, emerging as a leader in the almost unspoken competition among pilots to become the ace of aces. He became one to watch. The press started wiring accounts of his combat accomplishments back stateside, and his name started to be mentioned in speculation about whether an American pilot would break Eddie Rickenbacker's seemingly unbreakable record from World War I, 26 combat victories. In November 1943, Bong shot down his 20th and 21st enemy aircraft, a pair of Zeros over the airfield at Rabaul. General Kenny, knowing that his ace pilot was as valuable as a morale-building hero as he was in the air, gave Bong a 60-day leave to return home for a visit. Bong met with General Hap Arnold, posed for a few pictures, and then returned to Poplar, Wisconsin to enjoy, as ordered by Kenny, a little home cooking. The leading ace of the war was welcomed home as a hero, and while being crowned as honorary homecoming king at his old college, he met Marjorie Vattendahl, the 19-year-old homecoming queen. For the next 2 months, if he wasn't busy appearing at war bond rallies or launching ships for the war effort, he and Marjorie were together. By the time he left Poplar on the long journey back to the Southwest Pacific, he and Marjorie were in love. Captain Richard Bong returned to the Southwest Pacific as the leader in the race to become the ace of aces, in hot pursuit of Eddie Rickenbacker's combat kill record. Bong slapped his girlfriend's picture on the nose of his new P-38, which he christened Marge. 5 victories behind the record set by Eddie Rickenbacker in World War I, he went into battle with the whole world watching and an advantage over his competition. He was assigned not to the 9th Fighter Squadron, but to 5th Air Force Headquarters. In the competition to become ace of aces, the flyer with the most kills, Bong had become the favorite. The press had gathered to watch his achievement. While other pilots' assignments were limited to specific geographical areas where there might or might not be enemy activity, General Kenny allowed Bong to roam where he liked, in search of action and Japanese planes to shoot down. But they increased slowly. The number of Japanese aircraft had decreased, and the enemy was shifting to a more defensive posture. That limited the number of mass attacks that had created so many American aces. The Southwest Pacific was about as unnatural a habitat for the Wisconsin farm boy as it's possible to imagine. Hot, humid, bug-infested, and moldy, it was a place that seemed to reek of death. Bong went out almost daily, enduring long, boring patrols. Often he found no enemy aircraft at all. When he did, the combat lasted only minutes, and then a long return flight, often over open water, to inhospitable accommodations. That was his reward. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, Bong recorded his first kill in the plane he'd named for the girl back home, Marge. It was his only official kill for the month, though he did destroy a transport as it sat on the runway. The transport, it turned out, was loaded with high-ranking Japanese officers, and while it didn't count on his kill total, it struck a significant blow to the Japanese war effort. On March 8th, the tedium of the war turned to tragedy. Bong had reunited with his former commander from the 35th Bomber Group, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Lynch. The two were flying over Atape Harbor, New Guinea. Bong watched helplessly as his old friend and mentor spun down to his death. For the next month, Bong was ineffective in combat. He flew, but he didn't score any kills until April 3rd, when he knocked down his 25th enemy aircraft. The press gathered in anticipation. The folks back home waited for word of Bong's heroism. On April 12th, Bong shot down 3 enemy planes in a single day, shattering Rickenbacker's record. The news flashed around the world. Rickenbacker sent a telegram congratulating Bong and promising to send a case of scotch as a reward. General Kenny, doubly pleased that the record had been broken by an officer in his command, sent a case of champagne. Back in the States, Middle America was scandalized that people would send alcoholic beverages to a pilot in a combat zone. To quell the uproar, General Hap Arnold made a big show of shipping Bong 2 cases of Coca-Cola. Arnold slipped the press copies of his personal note to Bong, stating that America's newest hero would certainly prefer America's favorite soft drink. Bong, still the cheerful, baby-faced kid from the North Woods of Wisconsin, was having a ball. What he didn't realize is that by becoming the ace of aces, he had become a national treasure, too precious to risk in combat.
After he broke Rickenbacker's record of 26 victories, they did everything they could to the point of sometimes setting him down or sending him back on, publicity campaigns and things like that back in the States to keep him out of harm's way.
He returned to the United States, went on a war bond tour, and most importantly, proposed to Marge Vattendahl. He didn't return to combat for 5 months, reporting to General Kenny in September 1944 as a gunnery instructor. He could fly, but he was only allowed to fire in self-defense. He defended himself a lot. He shot down 5 enemy planes in October and 3 more in November. Kenny suggested to General Douglas MacArthur that Bong ought to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. MacArthur agreed and forwarded Kenny's request up the chain of command. In December, Bong went to Tacloban to receive the Congressional Medal from General MacArthur himself. In December, Bong shot down 4 more planes, bringing his total to 40. General Kenny, who had bent every rule to keep Bong flying, once and for all, pulled him out of combat. He shipped his favorite pilot back home, armed with a personal letter to General Hap Arnold and 6 bottles of Coca-Cola for the flight. Bong arrived back in the United States on New Year's Eve, 1944. He went to Washington, met with Hap Arnold, and participated in what seemed like an endless stream of public appearances, including a press conference with Eddie Rickenbacker. He broke away in February and returned to Wisconsin. There, in the Concordia Lutheran Church, he and Marge married. After his honeymoon, Bong received the plum assignment of flight testing the P-80 Shooting Star, the first American jet. He made 11 flights in the P-80, immersing himself in the theory and engineering of jet engines. On August 6th, he pointed the nose of his jet down the runway for his 12th flight. The plane rolled down the runway perfectly, but as it rose into the air, the engine flamed out.
Here's a guy that had, 200 missions, combat missions in the Pacific, shot down 40 enemy airplanes, was shot at on a daily basis, won the Congressional Medal of Honor, comes back to what's supposed to be a relatively safe stateside job, and dies in an accident on takeoff in an experimental airplane, the P-80, in California.
Dick Bong, the ace of aces, died the day the Enola Gay dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. His death, which would have made headlines almost any other day of the war, made barely a ripple in the public consciousness on that particular day. The bomb had dropped. The war Bong had fought in so heroically was about to end. As the whole world prepared to celebrate the end of World War II, Poplar, Wisconsin mourned. In tiny Poplar Cemetery, Dick Bong came home for good.
This warbird was a lethal weapon. Its main purpose for being, the reason for its existence, was to attack the enemy in the air, on the ground, or at sea. And that it did with a vengeance. It ranked with the fastest fighters of World War II. It was tough, durable, and versatile. It was called the P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was the fastest fighter in the early stages of the war, and the first fighter useful for long-range escort. It was called upon at different times to perform very different roles, and in each case, passed with flying colors.
The P-38 was a good airplane. It was not a major player in the European theater. It was a far better player in the Pacific because it had very good range characteristics. It was excellent for slashing attacks, for basically energy management type attacks where it would evade an enemy's more agile and more maneuverable lighter fighters by basically positioning itself with speed and altitude to seize the initiative against an opponent. It had a concentrated armament package. It had relatively dangerous high-speed dive characteristics because it was one of the first aircraft to approach what we would call sonic conditions. Not the speed of sound. It was not an airplane that could fly very close to the speed of sound, but it would exhibit some of the problems that you had from transonic airflow changes around an aircraft as it begins to fly close to the speed of sound. But it was by no means an inferior airplane. It was a very fine aircraft.
The P-38 had a 52-foot wingspan with a total length of just over 37 feet. Its height was 12 feet 10 inches. It was powered by two Allison V1700 engines, and it had a maximum speed of 415 miles per hour. It weighed 14,100 pounds empty and 17,500 pounds loaded for battle. With a ceiling of 40,000 feet and a range of 2,260 miles, it could go the distance and deal out a great amount of damage.
Where the P-38 really excelled, as I said earlier, was in the Pacific campaign, because there the combination of twin engines, very long range, really served that aircraft very, very well. The highest scoring American fighter pilots flew in the Pacific theater, and the top three all flew the P-38. For that matter, it may have even been more than the top three. There was certainly a number of leading aces in the Pacific theater who flew the P-38.
The Japanese were driving toward Port Moresby, one of the few bases still in Allied control. This was just north of Australia. If this area fell, it threatened to push the Allies into the sea. General Douglas MacArthur quickly reset the stage for an Allied offensive. He relied on General George Kenney, new commander of Allied Air, who was reorganizing the 5th Air Force after the beating it had taken early in the war. MacArthur ordered the troops rushed into battle. One regiment took 36 hours to go by water. A battalion took 5 weeks by foot. But 60 planes could carry an entire Australian infantry battalion in one day. If the P-38 could protect them, MacArthur thought it just might work. Specially designed airborne equipment such as pint-sized bulldozers and graders helped lay out 6 airstrips. Around Balbadura, they scraped out runways less than 16 miles from the front. When construction was completed, the P-38 moved in to protect the entire operation. The Southwest Pacific Air Forces, still under the direction of veteran Air Leader George Kinney and Fighter Commander Emmett Whitehead, had decided upon a tough, fast, tactical weapon which would stem the tide of Japanese aggression: the P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was the one airplane fighter pilots in New Guinea wanted. Kinney and others begged Washington to spare them a few of these high-flying, speedy lightning rods. When they finally got them, the ground crews had a big job on their hands. Fuel tanks, superchargers, armaments all required major adjustment or repair. Earlier in the war, General Kinney had warned the Pentagon that the Japanese were 2 days from their factory to the combat zone, and they might swarm all over him. On December 27th, the Japanese did just that. About 11:30 hours, they gave the P-38 pilots the alert. They received the word that the Allied radio station at Domadura had picked up a number of Japanese aircraft approaching the target area. The pilots had waited a long time for this moment, and, with the help of their crews, they got going in a hurry. It had taken more than 3 months to get the P-38s ready for combat. The maintenance crews had worked hard, and now the pilots were about to put the Lightnings to the test. As part of the 39th Fighter Squadron, they had flown some patrol and escort missions with the P-38. However, this was to be their first important combat operation. 12 brand new P-38s were being dispatched to intercept the invading force of unknown strength. Both sides were in for a surprise. At 12:10 hours, they sighted the Japanese. They were out in force. Separating into 3 flights of 4 each, the P-38 pilots got on top at 10,000 feet. The Zeros didn't appreciate the view. The P-38 lead flight peeled off to dive in and break up the formation. With his throttle wide open, this P-38 latched on to a Japanese. And then the first lightning struck. When the air battle was finally over, the 12 P-38 Lightnings had shot down 11 Japanese fighters and bombers. This was a dramatic debut for the P-38 in the Southwest Pacific. The tide was turning, but one battle didn't win a war, and one fighter could not do all the work. But the P-38 had proved its worthiness. The P-38 proved invaluable elsewhere. In North Africa, it was used to fight off the Nazis and protect the local population.
These street scenes were photographed by a concealed camera and reveal the true and varied reactions of the public during the raid. A Spitfire takes to the air. This is one of the Allied airfields in the vicinity of Bong. American P-38 rise to the attack. T-38 and Spitfires against Messerschmitt and Junkers. Out of control. This is the Messerschmitt. Most of the bombs fell in the city. V stands for victory everywhere. The crew of this one was captured. The final score, 14 Nazi planes shot down against a loss of 4 of our own.
Another role that the P-38 played was as a photo reconnaissance airship for the Allied forces. The 17th Photo Reconnaissance Squadron, stationed on Guadalcanal, had an excellent record of supplying the Fighter Command, Bomber Command, and the naval and ground forces with the particular and valuable type of intelligence information that photo reconnaissance could obtain. The plane the air commanders chose for this delicate work was a converted P-38. Here, a radio man tests the communications system and gets a line check from the squadron control station. A maintenance man was responsible for the condition of the camera. Because of the extremely humid climate of the tropics, the cameras had to be removed from the plane after every mission and taken to the camera tent for a complete check. Nearby was the operations board on which all missions were noted. The operations officer would receive a call asking for information concerning a certain area. He would list the data: destination, area to be flown, number of photos desired, etc., and then walk over to the board, and then call the pilot and write in his name and mission. After this, the pilot would be briefed. On this area map, the route would be pointed out. These are the Solomons, and the course would be an elliptical route from Guadalcanal, covering the islands to the northwest and their adjacent waters. Particular information was needed about enemy activity at Buna Island, furthest west in the Solomon Group. The operations officer, with additional information brought in from similar missions, advised the pilot as to which course to take, and was shown the spots where enemy flak and fighters would probably be encountered. The crew was then notified, and the proper camera and films made ready. The modified P-38 could accommodate 5 cameras. On this mission, 2 verticals and 2 obliques were used. For defensive purposes, most of the pilots carried a .45 caliber revolver. Except for a machete, this was all the armament these P-38 pilots carried on a mission. All armor and armaments had been stripped from the plane to accommodate the camera. The pilot's only protection was his speed, which was enough. The P-38 was the fastest photo reconnaissance plane in World War II. General Twining, commanding officer of the 13th Air Force, had stated that the 17th Photo Reconnaissance paid for itself by relieving heavy bombardment aircraft from reconnaissance missions on which several such heavy aircraft have been lost. In comparison, only one P-38 had gone down in 4 months of daily reconnaissance flights. The last item before takeoff is the cleaning of all glass through which the cameras shoot. It is interesting to note that only one belly tank was used on this recon. It was preferable not to limit the plane's speed by taking along 2 tanks, though most pilots felt the P-38 handled less well with 1 tank. Almost as quickly as the chocks were shoved under the wheels, the film magazine was emptied. No time was lost in getting the film to the field lab and rushing prints to the photo intelligence officer for interpretation. It is possible that one or more of these negatives held information that was of life and death concern to every man in the Guadalcanal area. Photographs can show things that the human eye cannot easily detect. At times, a whole fighter or bomber squadron could fly over an enemy installation and never see it. Furthermore, photos were examined carefully with stereoscopes and by more than one person. They were checked with other photos taken previously to catch minute changes in the arrangement of the terrain and to detect carefully camouflaged installations. Organizing the intelligence which the P-38 pilot had brought in, the intelligence officer gave his superiors a summary of the report. Half an hour had elapsed from the time the P-38 pilot returned from his mission. Already, a fighter squadron was rolling out to the runway, ready to act upon the information obtained by photo reconnaissance. It may be that the photographs and the verbal report disclosed that the enemy was open for attack at Tonalai. Perhaps it was discovered that enemy transports, destroyers, or bombers were sneaking up the channel. So out rolled the P-38s. Fighters this time, not recon, prepared to do a job that the alertness and efficiency of the photo reconnaissance squadron of special P-38s had helped set up. There were many examples of where the stripped-down P-38s doing reconnaissance were able to tell the fully armed Lightnings where and when to fight. One of the best examples was a mission where for 3 days in a row, P-38 pilots were sent on a low-level attack to knock out Rabaul on New Britain Island. Here, pilots are shown waiting for the weather to clear at forward staging bases in New Guinea. Then the P-38s got ready. From 6 squadrons of Lightnings, 2 squadrons had orders to sweep Simpson Harbor. The other 4 were to attack the land batteries. In all, 80 P-38 Lightnings scrambled off. In good flying weather, Allied bombers held their formations as they headed toward Rabaul. Once over the Solomon Sea, the plan went into effect. As the P-38s scanned the skies, they spotted what they were looking for, Japanese Zeros. The Lightnings swept in ahead of the bombers to clear the area. The P-38 could outclimb, outdive, and fly faster than the Zero. In all, the P-38s bombed 24 Japanese ships and strafed 17 on this particular mission. These pilots claimed 42 shot out of the sky. The cost? 45 American flyers and 17 American planes. In the space of 12 minutes, a formidable Japanese sea and air armada was attacked and decisively defeated. The P-38 Lightning made it possible. After 2 years of war, the Japanese strategic plan had been fatally upset. But the Allies knew the war was far from over. The armies of Japan still controlled much conquered territory. General Hap Arnold told the world, "There are many roads that lead right to Tokyo, and we're not going to neglect any of them." Relentlessly, the Allied attack continued, spearheaded by the P-38 and the striking power of the U.S. Army Air Force. As the war dragged on, the P-38 continued to play an important role, and not just in the Pacific. For example, in the famous second raid on the Plosti oil fields in March of 1944, the P-38 Lightning was called upon to lead the fighter attack. For hours, the P-38 Lightnings buzzed the Balkans. This was an all-out effort on the part of Allied pilots and crews. When they got within striking distance, the P-38 pilots climbed to bombing altitude and dumped their wing tanks so that they could maneuver better against the sleek Messerschmitts. The P-38 pilots destroyed 29 Nazi planes and damaged 3 refineries. In spite of its success in operations like the Plosti oil fields, some critics and a few pilots worried over the fact that the P-38 had 2 engines. Some felt this was a plus, in case one engine failed. Others believed it would be hard to fly with only one engine, and impossible for the pilot to bail out in case of emergency.
You know, there's this old joke in aviation development that the second engine takes you to the scene of the crash. One of the problems you have with a twin-engine airplane is that unless you have a very clean airplane, when you lose an engine on a twin-engine airplane, very often you're almost in a controlled crash type situation. The P-38, under most combat circumstances, when you lost an engine, that was a very serious occurrence. The other problem with the P-38 is that there was an engine reliability problem with those boosted Allisons, and so sometimes P-38s were lost in combat simply because of engine failure.
The Army Air Force felt that a 2-engine airplane did not mean that it was a difficult airplane to fly. They believed that the 2 engines were able to give it a wide range of performance and extra margins of safety. For those who insisted that it was impossible to bail out of the 38 because of the twin booms and rudders, and because of the horizontal stabilizer span, the Army and most pilots disagreed. They felt that it was no easier or harder to bail out of the P-38 than out of any single-seater fighter. Bailouts were made either by turning the plane on its back and dropping out, or by getting out the left window and sliding down the wing. Pilots were told not to stand on the wing to jump. As any pilot will acknowledge, the object wasn't to bail out of the plane, but to make the other guy bail out of his. The P-38 was a weapon that helped the pilots do just that. It carried plenty of firepower, and, unlike the Zero, had self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plating to protect the pilot. In short, the Lightning was tough, rugged, and reliable. Its high-speed performance was well known, but its control at most speeds was equally spectacular from the point of view of performance. If one engine did fail, there was still a workable single engine under the pilot. There was no difference in flight technique with either engine failing.
Right engine is dead. Trimming rudder tab. Closing right press-stone shutter. And right oil cooler flap. How's about setting the controls for unfeathering? Feathering switch in normal position. Manual propeller switch in fixed position. Right governor control in low RPM. All set and smooth as silk. Nice going. Now circle for landing. .2600 RPM with 20 inches. Tap control set at 0. Gear down at 160. .50% flat. It's in the bag.
The P-38 was a weapon that did not have to take a back seat to any plane in the war.
Gentlemen, this is the Mustang. It can fly... that was the Mustang. Pretty fast, huh? However, there are some nasty rumors floating around about this ship, and we might just as well admit they're true. Some pilots don't like the P-51. Here are the pilots. However, our pilots don't seem to agree with these gentlemen. Here's what they have to say.
I peeled off away from that 109 like I was standing still.
And when it comes to blasting enemy pillboxes...
Sir, she's the baby for low-level attack.
Why, I was on top of that supply column before the Nazis knew I was coming. Gentlemen, that was the Mustang. Designed, built, and flown in 180 days. Ordered in 1940 because the British foresaw the day when the deliveries made by the Ju-88s to Coventry would be returned with interest. An escort fighter which could fly farther and faster in protecting our bombers, delivering those bundles from Britain. Gentlemen, that was the Mustang. But today, in order to accompany our new bombers deep into enemy territory, our fighters must fly farther still and higher. Out of this need arose... Well, Colonel, there she is, the P-51B.
Looks like the old Mustang, doesn't she?
Yes, much of the construction is exactly the same. But Mr. Dietz, using the same basic design as the P-51A, has built a ship that'll fight from 25,000 feet on up.
That's the new engine, eh?
That's the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, built by Packard. It's a 12-cylinder job like the Allison and the P-51A.
But it packs a military rating of 1,520 horsepower and a war emergency rating of 1,630 horsepower. And a two-stage supercharger. This two-stage blower and external fuel tanks mean it can serve as a high-altitude escort fighter for long-range bombers, besides doubling as a low-altitude fighter, dive, or low-level bomber. And with 150-gallon ferrying tanks under each wing, your pilots will be hopping the Atlantic pretty soon without too much trouble.
And we're putting an 85-gallon tank in the fuselage, back of the pilot seat.
Now, these tanks, or the bombs, these are dummies, of course, go in these racks on each side, as you know. Without these racks, the plane has 15 miles per hour more top speed.
But this ship is faster than the old model, even with the racks on. And we're swinging a four-bladed prop to absorb the extra power.
It's a Hamilton hydromatic constant speed job with cuffs.
Now, we're using the same laminar flow airfoil as before. It made the Mustang such a fast ship. And, this is a newly designed aileron that gives the ship an extremely fast rate of roll. We call it the sealed balance type. I have a diagram here that illustrates how this aileron works. Now, the normal aileron looks like this.
When the aileron moves up into the airflow, air leaks through the space between the aileron and the wing. That's where a lot of the force applied to the stick is wasted. But our sealed balance aileron lessens to a great extent the force required, because the part of the airflow that formerly escaped can no longer do so. The cloth connection stops it.
Therefore, this airflow, which formerly escaped, exerts a force down on the airtight cloth, which in turn enables the pilot to force the wing down with much less effort.
You don't have to tell me why that's important in lining up those 450s there on a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf.
We have a pretty insulation on those guns. Let's take a look at them. Sam, give me a hand with these access doors here.
I want you to notice how we laid the guns on the side to eliminate any bulge in the airfoil. We're using a simplified mounting that allows removal in a few seconds.
What about the guns the Jerrys and the Japs are packing? What kind of protection does the pilot have from enemy gunfire?
Well, let's take a look at the sketches, shall we? We'll show you. Here we are.
The P-51B is equipped with face-hardened steel armor plating and an armor glass windshield. This affords protection for the pilot from bullets hitting within this area. We've also protected the coolant tank and the nose from frontal attack. In other words, in flight you get these cones of protection from enemy bullets.
Which should be comforting news to the pilot.
Well, personally, I think it's a good idea to get rid of the enemy before he has a chance to try the armor plating.
You've got something there, Major. Arthur, let's stop shooting the breeze and get this ship off the ground.
Okay, Bob. Colonel, if you'll join me in the control tower, we'll have grandstand seats.
Right. See you later, children.
Right, sir.
Bob will give a continuous radio report on everything he does in this plane which might deviate from normal pilot procedure, even if it's scratching his ear in the middle of a loop.
Hello, Mr. Steve.
Oh, Charlie, these are the gentlemen I called you about. Colonel, let's get over to where we can see things. Ah, there's Bob. Now, you notice he gets in the plane from the rear, and flaps are kept down to prevent anyone stepping on them. Now, Bob, before he gets into the cockpit, checks the Zeus buttons on the radio compartment panels. Once inside the cockpit, he gets comfortable, adjusts the rudder pedals, gets his shoulder harness set. Well, it should be ready by now. Charlie, let's give him a call.
Okay, Mr. Deeds. Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. The air's all yours, Bob. Nothing expected for the next hour. Over.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Well, here's where I start the monologue. Hope your ears can take it. I've checked the servicing of the ship to have an idea of the amount of load I'm carrying.
Rate of climb can vary as much as 500 feet a minute, depending on the load.
I close the cockpit enclosure by first pulling the left side into position, then lowering the upper portion. And I make sure the enclosure handle is locked in place with a safety latch, and rear hatch and felt molding is checked.
He checks to see that the warning pins in the right sliding track are down.
Pins checked. Starting the regular before starting engine check.
Oh, by the way, if you were going to make an engine run up on the ground, especially pulling more than 40 inches of manifold pressure, be sure that the tail of the P-51B is anchored securely, that the flaps are kept up. You see, the weight of the new Rolls-Royce engine has moved the center of gravity forward. As a result, the slipstream from the prop was liable to force the tail up.
During my regular check, I make sure that the emergency boost control is in automatic, as I'm only to use it in case of war emergency for not more than 5 minutes at a time. Making sure supercharger control in automatic and not in low. Coolant and oil switches checked in automatic. Fuel booster pump on normal. Finish check, starting engine. Clear.
The fuel booster pump draws from whatever tank the selector is on. We tried to cut down on the number of things a pilot has to do. That's why the ship has an automatic manifold pressure regulator connected to the throttle. But the pilot will have to be careful under icing conditions, because the automatic regulator will try to compensate until the carburetor is completely iced up. May I have the microphone, please, Colonel? Are you ready, Bob?
She's warmed up, ready for taxiing. Here I go. The attitude of this ship makes ground visibility very poor, so fencing is necessary even more than in most airplanes with a conventional type landing gear. In order to save the brakes, use the steerable tail wheel feature. If I hold the stick at neutral, or slightly aft of neutral, the tail wheel is steerable 6 degrees on each side. All I have to do is move the rudder pedal. The 6-degree steering feature doesn't allow sharp turns. In order to make one, I simply push the stick forward. The tail wheel unlocks and becomes full swiveling. However, excessive throttle or excessive use of brakes with the stick forward should be avoided to prevent nosing over. Making regular cockpit check. If in doubt, use the checklist. Every Army plane's got one. Flaps up. Coolers open. Trim tabs, 7 degrees, right rudder trim. Note that I switched the fuel booster pump to emergency. The pump draws from whichever tank the selector is on. Instruments, okay. Switches on main panel, okay. Checking oxygen gauge. Switches right panel, okay. Gas tanks, full. Running up engine, checking mags. Now, I use no flaps normally for takeoff, But if I were carrying bombs or external tanks, I might use them. So to show the operation, I'll use them this time. The best settings, 20 degrees flaps and 6 degrees tail heavy on the elevators, as the plane will get off more quickly and give a greater feeling of control that way. The manifold pressure can be used as you need it up to 61 inches. The propeller control is fully forward for the maximum RPM of 3,000. Taking off. Keeping the tail on the ground and use of rudder trim, as I said before, counteracts normal torque action on takeoff. A bit of back pressure on the stick has to be used to keep the tail down. Landing gear up. Here come the flaps. Practically no settling when they're raised. Fuel booster pump in normal. The plane feels normal now that it's off the ground. I'm heading upstairs.
Let's get a pair of binoculars so we can see what's going on. Colonel, there's a pair, Major.
Thank you.
"20,000 feet. The supercharger just changed over in a high blower. A jump seems to occur in the engine, then the manifold pressure returns to its original setting. It switches at an altitude of between 20,000 and 20,500 feet. Heading on upstairs. "25,000 feet. I've leveled off."
Hello, children.
Hello?
How is she on directional trim changes when speed and horsepower are varied?
I'll throttle back and give it a whirl. The airplane is stable at all normal loadings, but the directional trim changes at low speeds as horsepower and speed is varied. However, the rudder tab corrects this effectively with only a slight adjustment, and it should be used as necessary. Normally, there is no trouble as the plane is naturally stable.
That means the P-51B will remain at any altitude without adjusting the trim tabs.
Less work for the pilot. Now I'm going to show her stalling characteristics. The stall is comparatively mild and occurs at approximately 95 miles per hour indicated with gear and flaps up. About 3 or 4 miles above this stalling speed, a slight elevator buffet occurs. Plane 6 at distance, then rolls over on one wing. It doesn't whip over as some other planes do and has very little tendency to drop into a spin. The recovery is completely normal. All that has to be done is to release the back pressure on the stick and apply opposite rudder. With the gear and flaps down, the stall would have the same characteristics as before, only it occurs at about 85 miles per hour indicated.
Naturally, with combat tanks or bombs making an extra load, the stalling speeds are higher.
On to an accelerated stall. A heavy buffet occurs around the wing root fillet and the horizontal stabilizer 3 or 4 miles per hour above actual stalling speed, but the plane recovers immediately by releasing pressure on the stick. The accelerated stall has stronger warning characteristics than the normal stall.
Hello, Bob. Show us a couple of dives.
Okay, Colonel. Here she goes. Plane gains speed extremely fast in a dive. Tends to veer slightly to the right and continue in a dive without pulling itself out for quite a long time.
The propeller doesn't overrun during the dive, does it?
Not a bit. I put it at 3,000 RPM and it stayed nailed there. Any other questions, sir?
No, thanks. How about doing a couple of rolls for us?
Here's one to the left. Rate of roll is extremely fast, especially at high speeds.
That's due to the sealed balanced aileron. It's the final result of 14 different designs.
That fast roll really counts, too.
Yes, that means the pilot can disengage the enemy a lot quicker.
We believe the only enemy ship that can approach it for speed of roll is a Focke-Wulf 190.
Here's another dive. In the dive, the pilot doesn't have to maintain excessive forward pressure on the stick. Catch the slight tendency to veer to the right with a trim tab, if in a prolonged dive. Otherwise, the ship is positively stable in the dive. Hello, Arthur. I'm going up to high altitude and put her in a maximum speed dive to show you how fast you'll go before reaching compressibility.
Okay, Bob, let us know when you're up there.
Roger.
Now then, while Bob's climbing, there are some points that might interest you, gentlemen. Let's sit down, shall we? Colonel?
Thank you.
As you know, the true speed of a plane at the time compressibility occurs, divided by the speed of sound at that altitude, gives us a figure called the Mach number. So named after the man who discovered the relationship. Let's take an example. We'll say the plane reached compressibility at 560 miles per hour. That's true airspeed, at 10,000 feet altitude. Dividing this speed by 724, the speed of sound at 10,000 feet, we get, and gentlemen, we've done this arithmetic many times before, 0.76, the Mach number. Now that number indicates the speed a plane can dive at any given altitude. The higher the Mach number, the faster the plane can dive without encountering compressibility trouble. We believe the P-51B has the highest Mach number of any fighter. Now there's a point I'd like to make to pilots about getting into compressibility, but first a little more dope. The Mach number of any given ship remains the same no matter what the altitude. But the speed of sound decreases at high altitudes. So the higher the altitude, the less speed required to get into compressibility. Let's get back to our problem. Suppose we were at 30,000 feet. Then X, the speed we could go, divided by the decreased speed of sound at that altitude, 680 miles per hour, equals the Mach number, 0.76. Solving, we find that we could go only 517 miles per hour before getting compressibility. One more thing. The higher the altitude, the faster the true speed for any given indicated speed, and as I said, the lower true speed required to reach compressibility. So here's the point, and it's an important one. The pilot should remember that at high altitudes, he reaches compressibility at much lower indicated speeds than at low altitudes. At any rate, observe the speed limitations posted in the cockpit.
38,000. Are you all set down there?
I guess we're all set. We had enough theory for the moment anyhow. Major, should we let them know we're still down here?
Right. Hello, Bob. We're all set down here. You really gonna wind her up for us?
Just you hold on to your hat, Major.
Okay. Give us your indicated speed and how she acts when you get her into compressibility, will you?
Roger. I'll be down in a minute. $300, $350, $400, $440. Compressibility. Stick moving fore and aft. Slight elevator overbalance. Heavy buffeting on tail section. Oscillation occurs rapidly. However, control forces on elevators remain unchanged. Plane hunts slightly along horizontal axis. Pulling out now. No difficulty, except buffeting continues until a lower speed has been reached.
440 indicated at that height. That's really moving.
Enemy fighters will have a hell of a time trying to keep up with this ship in a dive.
They really would, Colonel.
I'm going to try a couple of spins. I'll do a right spin first. Here she goes. In a right spin, there is a continuous oscillation. A slight rudder buffet is present. Procedure for recovery completely normal. No trouble getting out of the spin.
Probably try one to the left now.
For 3 turns, an oscillation is present as in the right spin. Then the spin becomes stable. Recovery is the same. Full opposite rudder, then stick in neutral. Going into a sustained side slip. Couldn't hold it. I'll do another. The plane will not hold a sustained side slip. The aileron control is insufficient to hold it on a side slipping angle. The ship automatically tends to straighten out.
However, it will side slip long enough to avoid enemy fire.
What about prohibitive maneuvers? The usual limitations?
Right, no snap rolls, inverted spins, or outside loops.
Hello, Bob. How about some aerobatics?
Roger. Here's a loop. And into an Immelman. Here's a climbing roll. At high cruise, this airplane will even do a loop or Immelman from level flight position.
Of course, with the external fuel tanks or bombs installed, acrobatic maneuvers are prohibited. Also, every pilot should be warned not to fly inverted for more than 10 seconds. In that position, the scavenger pump fails to operate and oil pressure drops.
Going to fudge the field, Colonel. Want you to watch this for speed.
Here he comes.
And watch this.
Like a bat out of hell. Boy, that was beautiful.
Anything else I can show you while I'm up here?
That was beautiful, Bob.
Thanks, Colonel. I'll show you her gliding characteristics. I'll make a glide approach before landing.
Right.
Let's move over to where we can watch them come around. You show your power-off glide first. The ship is designed so it can glide any safe speed down to a margin of about 25% above stalling speed. With the gear and flaps up, the glide is fairly flat. The nose being high makes forward visibility poor. Now, if you lower either the landing gear or the flaps or both, you greatly steepen the gliding angle and increase the rate of descent.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Request landing instructions. Over.
Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. You clear to land, Bob. Use runway 25. Over.
Roger. Out. Making normal pre-landing cockpit check. Checking that fuel selector in on fullest tanks. Propeller control at 2,500 RPM. This setting gives a margin to apply power in case of a bad landing and helps prevent the engine from over-revving. There's a tendency to do that due to the flat position of the blades and lag of the pitch control mechanism. Mixture control in auto-rich. Oil and coolant radiator scoops in automatic. Lower the landing gear only below 170 indicated by pushing landing gear handle in down position. Make sure it's securely snapped so vibration won't jiggle it up. Adjust power and trim to maintain 150 indicator. When the airplane has been brought into the wind for landing, the flap should be lowered fully. But be sure the indicator is below 165. As soon as I turn into the field, I maintain gliding speed of around 115 with a normal water load.
With a full load, including auxiliary ferrying tanks, the gliding speed is between 125 and 130.
Adjust the trim tab to assist in landing.
Wow, that's a beautiful landing.
You might just as well crosswind. The wide landing gear and the lockable tail wheel make it safe. But as you know, never use more than half flaps. Well, let's go down to the line and talk to Bob. Thank you.
Well, how'd you like her, Colonel?
Nice show, Bob. Mr. Deeds, I think we've got something.
Thank you, sir.
Nice landing, Bob. But tell me, what happens if you make a bad one, if you bounce her in? Do you give her the gun and bring her around again, or do you just ease it in?
Well, if the attempted landing is badly made so that the wing drops or you get a bad bounce, go around again. But don't slam the throttle open, because if you're too near stalling speed, engine torque will drive you right into the ground. You should ease the power on, get the nose down, and go around again. If at the last moment you decide not to make a landing, ease the throttle open, and when you reach an airspeed of about 110 and an altitude of about 300 feet, raise the flaps by degree, a notch at a time, after raising landing gear.
Tell me, what about engine failure during flight?
Engine failure during flight. Pull the emergency release handle of the cockpit enclosure so you won't be trapped inside in case it jams on landing. Lean forward when you do, because the hatch might clip you on the ear. Drop your external fuel tanks. And if there's time, lower the flaps. But remember, you've got to do it by hand because your hydraulic pressure is gone. Keep your landing gear retracted and land on the belly of the ship. It's no tea party, but you shouldn't have too much trouble. Oh, one more thing. Get away from the ship as quickly as possible, because the cockpit can get a little warm in case a fire starts.
Tell me, how does she behave on scramble takeoffs?
Oh, same as any other fighter. If she isn't warm, the oil has to be diluted enough to ensure proper oil pressure at moderate power. Then, as soon as the engine will take the throttle, just taxi out and take off. But apply the throttle slowly and steadily. Sudden application, as in any takeoff, causes the engine to cough and spin. How'd you like me to check you out on it, Major?
What are we waiting for?
Excuse me, Colonel. Gentlemen, that's the Army's improved version of the Mustang. A stronger, longer-range Mustang for high-altitude fighting. And today, thousands more are being made by workers on the production line for you on the fighting line.
I'm Colonel Bud Anderson, and I'm going to do a, you might say, a walk around on a P-51B Bravo airplane. This particular airplane right here is painted exactly like my airplane was painted in World War II. It's been restored by Jack Roush, and he's done a marvelous job of restoring it. And one of the main features, of course, is the Malcolm hood, which is quite a modification on the P-51Bs and Cs. Bs and Cs had what we call a birdcage canopy, and you opened it like this over the top like that, and of course it had slats on the thing, and of course when you're looking out, the damn slat is right there by your eye. And so these were marvelous improvement for a pilot to look around in aerial combat. Well, when you did a walk around in the morning, you usually came out from operations and walked out to your airplane. Your crew chief would meet you somewhere in the area, and then you go over the paperwork and sign the Form 1A, the maintenance records on the airplane that the military kept at the time, and discuss anything about the airplane if you wanted. Of course, this was my own personal airplane, and I knew it very well, and I had a wonderful crew, ground crew. I flew all of my combat missions, 116, with 480 hours and 20 minutes of combat flying without a single abort for any reason whatsoever. That's pretty remarkable, actually. Having said what my combat record was, 116 missions without an abort, leads me to my crew chief story, which I like to tell whenever I can. You know, I think you could imagine yourself being a crew chief of an airplane, World War II. Your pilot's doing the fighting and the dying, and you're back here maintaining that airplane, and you know, if you're the crew chief, that's your airplane, and you're a part of it. And when that guy gets a kill and puts it up in here, that's your kill too. The guys were very, very supportive and wanted to do their part. Just incredible. And the story I like to tell, my crew chief story, is about my second tour when I had a P-51 D Dog, the classic model over here, and it was camouflaged in this dark green camo, completely, just about like this airplane here. And it was my second tour, and Otto Heino had been promoted to tech sergeant, and crew chiefs were staff sergeants. So he had a flight of 6 airplanes to oversee, and so he handpicked a new crew chief for me, Mel Schoenemann. And then, of course, the third member of my crew was Leon Zimmerman, who was my armor. All 3 of those guys were my crews during World War II, and also during my P-39 training. So as the story goes, in my second tour, I have the completely camouflaged D, and I think it was in November of 1944. I remember it was snowing over Germany, and snow had hit the night before, and I mean a big time snow, and all of northern Germany and northern Europe was in dense snow. And I looked down. We used to fly in the fingertip 4, a leader and a wingman and a element leader and a wingman. And I looked down against the here's a nice white surface right here with the flying on 4. And at this point of time, we weren't paying too much attention to the paint schemes. And we had all green ones, we had all silver ones, we had some that were in half camo and half silver. And I'm looking down at this snow, and which one stood out? Well, of course, the dark ones stood out. The camouflaged airplanes stood out. So I made a mental note to talk to my crew when I got back to after the mission. When I landed, I got them together and I said, you know, it's snowing over there and I'm going to finish my tour in the winter. Whenever this thing is laid up for heavy maintenance, would you please de-paint it, take the camo off of it and make it a silver paint scheme? And I put it to them on a tactical basis that it might save my butt. But frankly, you know, I had another reason. That was one reason, but I kind of thought the all silver airplanes looked a little cooler than the all camo airplanes. So I told them that, and I thought it would take, you know, 2 or 3 days to do that. And I did tell them, when it's laid up for heavy maintenance, please repaint the airplane. So I went in and I was the operations officer, and I decided that I wanted to fly the next day, put my name on the board, and went home and forgot about it. Next morning after breakfast and getting the briefing, come out, I grabbed my chute in operations and I walked out to my revetment. I'm the closest, my revetment was easy walking distance from operation. I had my parachute over my shoulder and I climb up over the revetment and I standing there looking down, and here's my Mustang sitting there in gleaming aluminum. And I was really quite flabbergasted. You know, I thought, wow, did those guys think I gave them a direct order to do that? And then I looked at them closely and I noticed their hands were raw. You know, the skin had been pushed off of them and they'd been rubbing and rubbing, and there was a little bit of blood on them. And that made me feel really, made me feel like hell. I said, I wonder, did these guys think I gave them a direct order to paint that thing right there? And then I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, no, you know, they wanted to do that. That was their contribution to the war, and they wanted to just please me however they could. And I just can't say enough about the crew chiefs of the world. So after you finish your paperwork and discussion with the crew chief, they always had the airplanes just absolutely perfect and ready to go. And there wasn't much sense of doing a walk around, but that's required. So we did a precursory walk around to comply with the rules. The pilot will do a walk around. So you walked around the airplane and just kind of checking. Here you want to make sure the gas caps are closed, the gun bay doors are down tight and smooth. Come over here, check the ailerons, see the tabs hooked together. Come along here, look on the wingtip, see if you don't, make sure you don't have any busted lights. This one doesn't have them all, and it has an extra light. We didn't have that one. And then you got over here, check your leading edge just so it's small, smooth, landing light, make sure it's not cracked and on. Then we got here, we would have a big 108-gallon fuel tank. It was just round, cylinder round and round on the end. And they were made out of pressed paper and resin. And we did that so that we wouldn't drop aluminum tanks over Germany and give them aluminum to help manufacture airplanes. They were very successful, but you had to get rid of them as soon as they were empty, or if you got into combat, of course, you jettison them immediately. because they were a lot of extra drag, and they would not stand a lot of airspeed. I can't remember what it was, but after a certain airspeed they would shred. So, and we did carry bombs briefly for about 30 days after the Normandy beachhead landing. Okay, check your bomb. You check the guns, and this is there's a difference on the B and the D, of course. The B model only had 2 guns, but they were also mounted differently. There's several production changes between the B and the D, but one of them, these guns are laying in here sideways, and I don't know which way they lay. Yeah, probably this way. And so the ammo doesn't feed in there directly like that, it feeds at an angle. And so we were having gun jams when you were pulling G's and firing. The guns would jam and you had no way of recharging them and all that. And we finally got that ironed out by having very clean working guns and then putting trays on top of the ammo so it wouldn't flop around. But when you're doing a walk around, you just check and make sure. They usually had tape over the things like that. You come around and check your tires. You know, the old saying, fighter pilots come around and kick their tires. But you just want to make sure that the tire was inflated. And you check a lot of things like that. Come under here and check any loose lines and stuff like that. These doors are hydraulically operated, and we have the hydraulic pressure has been broken on them, so you can actually move them up and down. You want to take a look at the radiator while you're under there and make sure there's no birds in there or stuff like that, rabbits and other kind of animals. Then we'll come around and check the props. These would be removed, and there isn't much you can check. You're looking for Zeus's that are not tight, stuff like that. Check the propeller just for smoothness, and you'd want to be sure that this thing was out. And again, you check your check the main scoop, and you come around on this side and do the same. You get in here and you look around for loose lines, anything that doesn't look there. Oh yeah, and on the landing gear you want to be sure that this thing isn't flat. It has a certain, you want to make sure there's a gap here on the oleo strut, so that it's not down here flat, or it's not stuck way up here, and the airplane would be cocked sideways like that. Not much else you can check, just to make sure, you know, everything's working. Again, the gun's the same thing. Again, on this side, you would check your tank and just make sure it's hooked up properly, and look for any visual reference of a problem. And on this side, if you had a pitot head cover on it, it would be removed. Your crew chief would remove it, but if it wasn't, you want to be sure and take that off, because it will interfere with the airspeed indications properly. Smooth leading edge. Come on out here, same thing. Check all this going back. You get on the trim tab again, flaps, and again, you want to make sure all these doors and all these things were attached. And in particular, he wanted that to be sealed properly. And come down in here. Now, when you come by the radiator, the thing that I always look for when I first walk up on the airplane is to make sure that this scoop is in what we call the open position. That's manually wide open. And so you knew that the controls are set properly, but we always double checked them. This is a tie-down hole that goes through there. Just make sure that the airplane isn't tied down. Come around here, leading edge. The B models that we had, the Bs and the Cs, did not have this strake on it. They came right down here like that to the wing, and these were a field mod. They came on some of the late production airplanes, but they were added afterwards. Jack had a standard tail and decided to add this ventral to improve the directional flying qualities of the airplane. You got the leading edge, counterbalance. All you're doing is just checking for, see that everything's here. Trim tab, come around here. Here's the rudder tab and the rudder. And then you come around this side, same stuff. Check the wing, back and forth. And then you're back here. You want to just check your tail wheel, make sure it's inflated properly and the doors are unobstructed. And again, here's what we check here. Make sure that that thing is wide open. That's real important. Then the last thing on this side, you have the fuselage tank thing. You want to make sure it's closed and sealed properly. Okay, from this point, you would gather up your parachute. You might even be wearing it, be a back chute. And you mount the airplane from this side, or you could come up the strut on the front, and then we'll go get in the cockpit, and I'll give you a kind of a run around the cockpit, showing where all the switches are and things like that.
Fast and sleek, looking every inch the thoroughbred fighter it was, the North American P-51 Mustang rose from obscurity to carve out a unique place in aviation history. Loved by its pilots and feared by its enemies, the Mustang possessed a rare blend of speed, agility, and range that made it an unbeatable air-to-air fighter.
Pilot's airplane. Real comfortable pilot's airplane. Very honest. No bad habits, no bad tendencies. Great performance. Lots of armament, lots of gas, lots of fuel. It was a superior airplane in performance all around. I think it was the airplane of the war on any side.
They were a beautiful airplane to fly, and I could sit there and reach all the switches and everything. I didn't have to get a bunch of pillows or anything. I could move the seats up and fly it, and really was a easy airplane to fly.
I don't know how to describe it. As I said, they were very responsive. You felt you could outfly anything. It was an easy plane to take off, to land. It was very maneuverable. You could brake right or left almost with equal ease.
It had more power, more maneuverability, more speed, more climb. It probably was better than anything the Germans had by 2%. Within a lot of dogfights where I was very happy with my 2%.
When the Mustang appeared in the skies over Europe, the United States Army Air Force pilots finally had the ability to carry the fight to the Luftwaffe over Nazi Germany itself.
Oh, those planes were very maneuverable. The 109s and 190 were a good airplane the Germans had. But then we got the 51s, which was a different story altogether. And when you got in this 51, and you think to yourself, oh, God, if this damn thing ever quits on. But that Merlin engine would run like an old Model A Ford. Just ran forever.
Now, when the P-51 came along, that changed the range. Gosh, we can fly forever in a P-51. And I think my longest P-51 mission was a little over 6 hours. P-38, 4.5 hours would be about the longest one, maybe 4:45. So there are some targets that became available to us after we got the P-51.
And while the German Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt outclassed earlier American fighters, the P-51 outperformed them both. Plane for plane, nothing could beat a Mustang with a good man behind the stick.
I got behind this guy on a descending course and was gaining on him, and I opened fire, and I had a number of hits on his wings and fuselage, and he immediately broke hard up. And again, I was overrunning him, so I had to go up and then back down. But when I turned back down, I found him coming up at me, and I not to this day figured out how he did that. But I know that he got on my tail. The 109 has a 20-millimeter cannon that fires right through the hub of the propeller. And I went into a Luftberry circle. That's as tight a circle as you can turn. And he was directly behind me, so that my only view of him was to look straight back like this and every time I looked, that 20-millimeter cannon was blinking, and I've got nothing but a thin plexiglass cover over my head. Fortunately, those shells were going just behind my tail. I made, I think, probably 75 to 100 circles, but whether it was the Mustang that much better than the 109 or whether I was that much better than him or a combination of both, I was gaining on him. And he finally rolled over and headed straight down, and I decided to let him get away. And he got away, and so did I. I hit him, he didn't hit me, but we had a 10-minute individual battle.
Though today, the Mustang is considered to be one of the greatest American fighters ever built. Oddly enough, it began its career as a reconnaissance aircraft flown not by the United States, but by Britain's Royal Air Force. It would take almost 4 years for the Mustang to evolve into a war winner. 4 years that started with an odd request at an impossible deadline in the darkest days of World War II.
The British were looking to the U.S. aircraft manufacturers to make fighter aircraft for them. They approached North American hoping they would build P-40 Warhawks. North American came back at them with a counter-proposal. They would design and build and fly a completely new aircraft within 100 days.
At the time in 1940, the British were utterly desperate for anything that could be a combat-ready fighter, so they were going all over the United States looking for anything that they could purchase. When North American made their proposal, the Brits actually snapped at the opportunity. They just went for it because they needed aircraft quickly, and North American was promising delivery of the prototype within 100 days or so, and they were promising an aircraft better than the P-40, and they needed something better than the Tomahawk. And in fact, North American did exactly what they promised. In 117 days, they had the prototype, the P-51 Mustang, which was called the NA-73, constructed. And within 130 days, that prototype flew for the first time.
The British initially ordered 600 of the P-51s, and they're very enthusiastic about this aircraft. However, despite that enthusiasm by their British allies, the American aviation authorities are really not interested in the P-51 at all until 2 years later.
The Royal Air Force soon took delivery of about 600 of the North American fighters, which they dubbed the Mustang I. British pilots soon discovered they had a terrific low-level aircraft on their hands. With the top speed of almost 390 miles an hour on the deck, the Mustang I was probably the fastest American fighter of its day. Light on the controls, very agile, and capable of climbing at over 3,000 feet a minute, the Mustang looked like a real winner. However, the new plane did have its share of serious drawbacks.
The original Mustangs came out with Allison engines. They were extremely good for low-level work. And that's what the British used them for. Low-level fighter sweeps, tactical recon. They were unsuited for long-range escort work because the engine could not perform adequately at high altitude.
While the Mustang I did not have exceptional high-altitude performance, the British still loved the aircraft because down low, it was awesome. It was fast, it was quick, it could get away from anything. So they used it in a variety of roles, mainly low-altitude TAC recon and armed reconnaissance against ground targets. But sooner or later, they were bound to come in contact with the Luftwaffe, and in August of 1942, the first Mustang kill of the war was scored. And it's kind of an interesting incident because the fellow, Hollis Hills, was a Royal Canadian Air Force pilot who happened to be an American, flying an American aircraft in British service. And he shot down a Focke-Wulf 190. So it was one of those incidents of the war that truly reflected the international character of the Allied war effort.
Flying at treetop level and facing scores of light and medium flak batteries on every mission, the brave Mustang pilots pressed on, snapping photos of key installations and shooting up anything on the ground that moved. While the British found the Mustang very useful in Western Europe at first, the United States Army Air Force had little interest in the new fighter. It took some time before the Americans could be won over by the glowing reports coming back from the RAF on the Mustang combat record. Almost reluctantly, the USAAF ordered a small number of Mustangs, dubbed the P-51A, and sent them to observation and tactical reconnaissance squadrons. Unfortunately, the Allison engine and its lack of a supercharger continued to limit the plane's high-level performance, a fact not lost upon the American pilots.
The very first P-51s were the A, had an Allison engine, and they were used for dive bombing and various things, but they were not very impressive.
I flew an A, a few hours in an A out of England, just practicing. We didn't have enough airplanes, and so I flew. We had a couple of A's on the field, and I flew that to practice some dive bombing because it was basically a dive bomber. They didn't have the power, and they were just not as responsive. It had an Allison engine in it, and it really couldn't keep up with much of anything. As I said, it was primarily a dive bomber.
In late 1942, North American, utilizing some of the best features of the P-51A, unveiled a new version of the Mustang designed as a single-seat dive bomber and called it the A-36 Apache.
Only a couple hundred A-36s were produced, enough to equip a couple of fighter bomber groups, and those fighter bomber groups ended up serving in the Mediterranean or in Burma. The problem with the A-36 was it couldn't carry a heavy load, especially compared to the P-47, so it didn't last long in service. It was also vulnerable to ground fire, and in steep dives, the pilots had a tendency to torque the tail section and actually do structural damage in steep dives. So it was not particularly effective as a combat dive bomber. But what it did do was deliver ordnance with pinpoint accuracy far above and beyond anything that the other fighter bombers the Army Air Force had at the time.
Coming in at a medium altitude, the Apache squadron would line up on their targets, then wing over into steep dives, opening their butterfly flaps as they went to slow their descent. Using their reflector gunships to aim, the pilots would wait until the very last possible moment to drop their bombs. At about 1,000 feet, they would pull up and come off a target. Such hair-raising dives took nerves of steel and excellent marksmanship. But when done right, no other Army Air Force aircraft could get its bombs on target with better accuracy. And since it had derived from a fighter, the A-36 could find its way out of trouble. In fact, Apache pilots scored many air-to-air victories, and at least one even became an ace. While the A-36 enjoyed limited success, dive bombing never really gained acceptance in an Army Air Force dominated by strategic bombing advocates. After serving about a year, the dive bomber groups were all re-equipped and given fighters. In the A-36, the Mustang had reached an evolutionary dead end. But just when it looked like it would barely be a footnote to the European air campaign, a few inventive minds rescued North American's design and gave it a new lease on life. By mid-1943, the Mustang had seen combat as a reconnaissance aircraft, a dive bomber, and a ground attack fighter. As a pure fighter, however, it seemed destined to be a failure. But just as it appeared, the Mustang would be relegated to minor roles in the air war. A few men came up with a brilliant idea that would transform the P-51 into the most effective air superiority fighter history has ever seen.
There was a British pilot by the name of Harker who got the idea of taking a Mustang 1 airframe and mating it with a British Merlin engine. And he proposed this to a U.S. Air Force, Army Air Force colonel by the name of Hitchcock, who agreed that this might be a worthy thing to do. So they went off and they got approval for this, and they took a Merlin engine, put it into a Mustang, and discovered that they had a thoroughbred fighter with excellent high-altitude capability. The Merlin was being produced in the United States at the time by Packard. And so pretty soon the approval was given to produce the Mustang with the Packard-built Merlin engine. And that became the P-51B, the first true strategic fighter of World War II.
The British engine that Packard built was extremely reliable. It was a great engine, lots of power, and altitude performance. Had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that let it get to high altitude. So it was a superior performer in every way.
With a top speed of almost 450 miles an hour at high altitude, the Merlin-powered Mustang now had the engine needed to carry the fight to the Luftwaffe as an air-to-air fighter. British and German fighters generally had an endurance of about 2 to 3 hours, which meant their combat radius was somewhere around 300 miles. With additional long-range drop tanks, the Mustang soon proved they could fly for up to 8 hours. That meant the P-51 could range over the farthest reaches of Nazi Germany and still return back to their bases. The United States Army Air Force had its strategic fighter, and it appeared on the scene not too soon after. Through the fall of 1943, the heavy bombers of America's 8th Air Force had been taking a beating over Germany. Without escort fighters, the 8s, B-17s, and B-24s were being shot to pieces by the Luftwaffe. Their bomber generals had begun screaming for a new fighter that could stay with their groups all the way back to Berlin. It seemed a tall order, but the new P-51B fit the bill perfectly.
In the early part of the war, before the Mustangs came in, they couldn't get escort beyond a certain point. The 47s and 38s could only take them part way, and then they had to go back. And when our group came, we could take them clear into target and pick them back up on the other side. So, of course, there were only a handful of us initially, and but we were able to help them a little bit. Later, of course, 51s were all over the place. We used to watch them in prison camp, and when they'd go over, and it looked like each bomber had their own 51 escort with them.
The P-51s were the workhorses. There were so many more P-51s because their range was farther, and I think their maneuverability was better. They were our little buddies. They didn't have much use for us. They didn't understand what it was like to drive a truck.
In December of 1943, the first P-51B group, the 354th, arrived in England.
We flew the P-39 up until we got to Europe, up until we left for Europe. We had no idea what we were going to fly when we landed. They cut orders sending Jack Bradley and Bob Stevens and myself to an English base to check out a new airplane. When we got back, they were already bringing B-51s in, B model, and so we were off and running in B-51.
New to combat, the 354th promptly received an education at the hands of the Luftwaffe.
We learned that combat is not really fun sport. On the first mission, my first mission was about 3 hours, and the weather was terrible. We were in danger of mid-air collision with each other. I saw no enemy aircraft, but one did come in and shot one plane down. We lost a plane and a pilot on our very first mission, on the first mission I flew. It was the second mission the group flew. And so I found out that this is serious. Pete Quezada was our commanding general, head of 9th Fighter Command at that time. Pete came in and talked to us, and I remember him saying, you are in a very serious business. Not all of you will live to get home.
With their new weapon, however, the Pioneer Mustangs did not take long to score. On December 13th, 1943, a pilot from the group's 355th Fighter Squadron shot down an Me-110 over Kiel, Germany. It would be the first of 700 kills, but the price of victory was high.
We went overseas with about 75 pilots in the group, maybe 80 counting pilots in group and so forth. And we lost 220. And you got to stop to think that we're the #1 scoring group in the war, that we had more victories per loss than any other group, and yet we lose over double our numbers in the 2.5 years we were in combat, 2 years we were in combat.
At first, the Germans were puzzled by the appearance of the Mustang over what had been their own skies. Luftwaffe pilots frequently mistook the 51 for an Me-109 that led to some strange episodes in the air.
The Germans didn't know what it was, and in fact, on one early mission, a 109 joined the formation and flew alongside for 10 seconds before he recognized what he had done and peeled off, and I headed away. I don't remember whether somebody got him or not.
Indeed, the P-51 resembled the Me-109 profile so closely that even American aviators were fooled on occasion.
Because of the greenhouse canopy, it looked very much like an Me-109. So one of the problems we initially had was getting shot at by our own aircraft. P-47s primarily, never ran into any 38s, and the 17s and 24s.
Despite the recognition problems both sides had with the Merlin engine Mustangs, the new fighter quickly proved it could change the entire nature of the strategic air war over Europe.
Well, of course, we could go a lot farther than we could previously. I think the operation of the missions remained the same, but the tactics had changed. Initially, early on with the P-38, we were not allowed to leave the bombers. When the tactics changed that we could go out ahead of the bombers and attack the German fighter force as it was climbing up to do battle against the heavies, that was when the shades of war changed, because we had a lot better chance to kill the German Air Force if we could go out and attack them ahead of the bomber force rather than wait for them to attack the bomber force.
The 554th Fighter Group and its new Mustangs had changed the nature of the air war, and in doing so had rescued the 8th Air Force faltering strategic bombing campaign. Now it became absolutely essential to get as many P-51s to England as possible. Only then could the Luftwaffe be driven from Europe's skies. In December of 1943, Colonel Don Blakeslee paid a visit to the 354th Fighter Group and spent several days teaching the new outfit some of the finer points of air combat tactics used against the Luftwaffe.
He led our mission 3 times, and he obviously liked what he found with the P-51, because he went back and pulled strings until the 4th group got him. So he liked it, no question.
Blakeslee, after flying with the 354th, fell in love with the Mustang. So he went to the CO of the 8th Fighter Command, General Ike Kepner, and begged Kepner for Mustangs for the 4th Fighter Group. Kepner agreed to let his group convert, provided that they get in the air and fly combat as quickly as possible. And so Blakeslee agreed, and he went back to the group. He trained the guys very quickly on the P-51, and within just a few days of converting, they were in the skies over Germany. And with their new Mustangs, the 4th Fighter Group went on to become one of the highest scoring outfits of the war. They finished combat in Europe and didn't fly in the Pacific. So just in Europe, they scored over 1,000 air and ground victories.
As more P-51Bs arrived in England, the 8th Air Force began to convert its P-47 groups. In January, only about 50 P-51s were combat-ready to escort the bombers over Germany. By April, however, almost 400 were available, and some of the hottest squadrons in England were now equipped with the revolutionary fighter. As the number of Mustangs in Europe increased, the Luftwaffe's losses skyrocketed. Through the spring of 1944, the German Air Force lost between 10 and 30% of its fighter pilots each month. While the Luftwaffe always had planes on hand, by the summer of 1944 it faced a pilot shortage so acute that it proved impossible to solve. Though the Mustang was winning the war in the air, the P-51B model did have a number of bugs that took time to be ironed out. Some of these defects could be disastrous in combat.
We had initially a problem with gun feed. You're in a high-speed turn and pull up to so many Gs and it would stop your guns from firing.
And the wing was so narrow that you couldn't stand the machine guns upright in the wing. They had to be over at about a 45-degree angle. And consequently, the belt, when it came over with the shells, every once in a while, as it came over that hump, they'd jam. And so it wasn't at all unusual to fire off a few bursts and have all your guns jam.
In fact, a couple of mechanics in our group devised the system which would keep it feeding no matter how many Gs you put on.
In the early summer of 1944, most of the issues with the P-51B had been solved. The B would remain in service at least until the end of 1944, but long before that, a new version of the Mustang had entered service. Dubbed the P-51D, it would soon earn a reputation as the ultimate Mustang variant.
A lot of the 51s had 1,500, 14 and 1,500 horsepower. The Ds, the ones they used the most, had 1650 in those Packard Merlin engines. The visibility is the main thing, because the Bs and Cs had the windshield and all the glass fared right into the back of the aircraft. The D had a big bubble canopy on it, and you had unlimited visibility in that. And that was the biggest advantage, plus the fact that they had more horsepower a little bit. And they had 6 50 caliber machine guns on board, 3 in each plane. And they had different drop bomb shackles and stuff on them. I shot the 6 several times just to make sure that we knew what was going to happen, because they'd slow you down 50 miles an hour the minute you start firing. The recoil would slow the airplane right down. And when you had all 6 of them going, it really looks like that.
At this time of the war, a lot of our duty was strafing and dive bombing. And with our new Ds, we went out on a dive bombing mission, and we had, in the 3 missions we flew that day, I think we had 8 planes that peeled the wings off on the dive. And the extra gun in each wing had weakened the wings so that right in the middle of your dive, a wing would peel back. Not a terrible place to be. You got a bomb you're riding down, and even if you jump, you're going to be in the middle of the explosion. And we got back, they grounded the P-51. And we didn't fly for a couple of days, and then they had modified the wing. We got it back and used it the rest of the war.
With the success of the Mustangs in England, fighter units in Italy began converting to the P-51. One of the first outfits to do so was the 332nd Fighter Group, which initially received P-51Bs and Cs, but finished in the war with the D model. Dubbed the Red Tails, the 332nd was one of the most unique organizations in Army Air Force history.
The 332nd was the only all-black fighter group in the United States Air Force. Because of the racial situation in America at that time, they were subject to a great deal of abuse and racial prejudice, even while they were fighting this war. But despite those problems that they had with their fellow servicemen, they rose above those issues, and they performed admirably, especially in the role of escorts for the heavy bombers in the Italian theater.
Commanded by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr., seen here briefing his men, the Red Tails took their new job very seriously. Meticulously prepared and dedicated, the 332nd proved to be the most outstanding escort group of the war.
They had an excellent reputation, and we were always very happy to see them. They were readily identified with that red tail. And yes, I can, now that I think about it, I can recall at least once when there were fighters approaching us and they took off after them, and we went on to the target without a single fighter getting into us. But I'm sure that happened more often than we knew about, too.
The 332nd Fighter Group claims one of the most unique distinctions of World War II. Despite all the missions they flew and despite all the opposition they encountered over Germany, especially towards the end of the war, they never lost a bomber that they escorted in any of the groups that they flew with. No other fighter group in World War II can claim that kind of an honor or distinction.
While other units scored more of aerial victories, the Red Tails earned the respect and admiration of the 15th Air Force's bomber crews. Where once the Tuskegee Airmen had been spurned and derided, by the end of the war, the bomber groups were requesting them as their escort.
We had a good escort. The black guys, they would fly the 51s, and they'd come up and as we was coming back off our mission, and see one group would take us into the target, and then the other group would escort us home. And so as we was being escorted home, the black guys would get out there, and there was one in particular, he was a card. He'd get out there and do all kinds of tricks with that plane, it amused us,
The Red Tails had become the ultimate little friends, and through their efforts had forged a bond in the air that transcended race and color.
Meanwhile, as the groups such as the Pioneer Mustangs and the Red Tails battled the Luftwaffe, the P-51 was poised to bring the war home to another enemy, the Japanese. Soon, the Mustangs would control the skies over Tokyo itself, ensuring Japan's total and irreversible defeat. Early Mustang variants, such as the P-51A and the A-36, had seen action against the Japanese as early as 1943 in the China-Burma-India theater. Those early days of the Mustang operations were unspectacular, but the plane did prove to be faster than anything the Japanese could pit against it. Most frequently, however, the early Mustangs were called upon to deliver ground strikes, strafing targets in Burma and China. Mustang pilots would also go after shipping along the Burma coast, hoping to choke off the supplies to the Imperial Army fighting in the jungle. It was not until the capture of Iwo Jima that the Mustang truly came into its own in the Pacific.
We had a whole bunch of Army P-51 Mustangs. That's the reason we took down. Spent all that blood was to provide a staging base for the P-51s to escort the B-29s on their raids against Japan. The 29s were all out of Saipan and Tinian, where we had just come from, 700 miles south, and the 51s would pick them up or meet them as they come over Saipan or over Iwo on the way to Tokyo, and escort them to Tokyo and back, which was 1,500 miles up and back to Iwo.
These fighter escort missions, taking the B-29s to Japan from Iwo Jima, took anywhere from 7 to 8 hours to complete. And even though the P-51 was an excellent airplane to fly, the strain on the legs and lower backs of these pilots for flying for that length of time caused many of them to be cramped up when they returned from these missions, to the point where they had to be assisted out of their airplanes by the ground crews. And so to do this day after day over and over again took a great deal of courage and stamina on the parts of these pilots.
First missions we flew were bomber escort, and once we got there and flying up and down the bomber line, we could pick out targets on the ground. We'd go down and nothing definite at first. And later on, we had definite targets, like at Sugi Air Base was one of our first targets. And the B-29s would take us up there specifically to make this run on this air base. They'd wait for us offshore. We'd go in, hit the aircraft and installations on these air bases in Japan. B-29s on this type of mission were just escorting us. There are navigational planes, and they'd stay about 20,000 feet offshore, and we always gave them a high cover. At least 4 P-51s stay above them, protecting them, waiting for us to get off the target and come back. On one occasion, after we'd finished working over this target, we homed in on the B-29, sending us the signal, the locator where we could find him. As we approached it, we could see the Japanese starting to make passes on our B-29, which gave us a little bit of worry because he was our ticket back home. And fortunately, the high cover prevented this, and they shot down the attacking Japanese before we got there.
By the spring of 1945, Mustangs roamed the length and breadth of the Japanese home islands, protecting the heavy bomber streams while searching for targets of opportunity. Japan's interceptor force was soon driven from the skies.
It so happened on this mission over Japan, we were flying in high cover for the B-29s. We were up around 25,000 feet, and suddenly I lost power, and the manifold pressure dropped way back, and I thought I had serious engine problems. I sweated out for a little while, and I called my wingman, so I'm going to have to go down. And I was just looking for a spot to bail out, because this is the day they firebombed Tokyo and Yokohama pretty badly, and the fireballs were coming up 5,000 feet high, and so I thought I'd get out offshore as far as I could if I had to jump out. As I was descending, trying to get my engine running again, we noticed several Tojos below us and climbing towards the B-29s. And I was directly behind one Tojo, so I just closed in as fast as I could and opened fire. And the debris started flying off, and my wingman shot one on the left side there. So I still was concerned about my engine, but I forgot it during the combat. And I didn't realize till I got well off the target, the engine was running pretty well again.
With little fuel available and even fewer experienced pilots, Japan's air defenses collapsed.
Yeah, there was quite a difference in the Japanese pilots near the end of the war. In fact, I think the group we ran into, the Tojos, I think it was just a big training group, because they were just flying. There was no evasive attempt or anything on their part. And we just closed in on them and just like shooting ducks. If I had had a better engine, I probably would have stayed longer in that group. But there's several of them were shot down by the other P-51 pilots.
By the summer of 1945, the Iwo-based Mustangs had gained total control of the skies over Japan. Without fear of interception, the P-51s went down the deck and searched for targets of opportunity. Nothing was safe from their murderous 50 cals. When Japan finally surrendered in August of 1945, there were hundreds of P-51s based on Iwo Jima ready to support the planned invasion of Kyushu. Fortunately, the surrender made that operation unnecessary. In the final months of the war in Europe, almost 2,000 Mustangs protected the American heavy bombers. Such protective shield proved almost impossible for the Luftwaffe to penetrate. Bomber losses plummeted and Germany's cities and industries were systematically devastated by the American strategic bombing campaign. With the fighters knocking down every German plane they saw in the sky and the bombers pulverizing Germany's war industry on the ground, the Allied forces were virtually unopposed in the air. Flak and small arms fire, however, still posed a great threat, especially to the liquid-cooled engine of the Mustang.
We were out on a search and destroy mission. I found 6 German trucks on the road, went in strafing and set 4 of them on fire on the first pass and pulled up. I had not seen any return fire, so I went back to get the other 2. And when I went back the second time, I find myself going across a open field with 100 German soldiers on their knees with rifles firing at us. And probably they came from the trucks we'd burned. And a P-51 will not take a lot of punishment. If you lose your coolant, you're done. And I lost my coolant. I got up to 8,000 feet, and the coolant temperature hit the red peg, and there was no way. I began to lose power. Started calling for Mayday for a fix. I'd pulled the red handle, and the canopy flew off just like they told me it would. I started to jump, and I had my shoulder straps laying on my shoulder. Pulled me back. I picked up the microphone, said goodbye, undid the shoulder strap, made another jump. I hit the end of the radio cord, couldn't get back, drop back in. As long as I was back, I said goodbye, unplugged the radio, made a third attempt, and got my head out. I'm going 100 miles an hour, 105 maybe, and the wind caught my goggles and pulled them out about a foot from my head. I pulled my head back, and they snapped back, and I dropped back down in the seat. So I plugged the radio in and said goodbye, took the helmet off, and 4th try I got out. Found myself hanging very quietly over a tank battle down below me. Quiet up in the air, no sound in the air, but a lot of sound, gunfire, both heavy and light gunfire down below. I was east of Metz, and the Germans still held Metz. I get on the ground, I hid under a bush. A German half-track pulled into the field, and 2 soldiers with rifles were looking for me. I thought, well, they know I'm here, so I stood up and put my hand up. Got halfway there, and I noticed that over the German Iron Cross was a crudely painted white star, and they were a captured vehicle, and they were part of Patton's 3rd Army, and they were 40 miles ahead of where people thought they were, and so I got a ride with them. And the next day, they flew me back by a Cub observation plane, my base.
Even though the liquid-cooled engine was a drawback when the 51s were used to hit ground targets, the Mustang was still considered to be the best mass-produced fighter of the war, and some would argue of all time. Near the end of World War II, the Mustang's apex of success had been reached, but even at this pinnacle, the shadow of its own downfall could be seen on the horizon.
With the advent of the Messerschmitt 262, the first operational jet fighter, the Germans had really dealt the death blow to the piston engine fighter design. And while the Messerschmitt 262 really represented the future, the pilots flying the older designs, the Mustangs, really figured out in the final days of the war how best to fight their aircraft against this new technological marvel. And so on many occasions, the Mustang pilots actually came out on top, despite the Messerschmitt 262's amazing speed.
On this particular day, in April 45, I was on a search and destroy mission. I was at 12,000 feet with 4 planes. I spotted movement down below me, and I recognized the silhouette of a Messerschmitt 262 jet, and I had 10,000 feet altitude. He was at 2. So I rolled over. I was determined he wasn't going to get away from me, so I beat Chuck Yeager through the sound barrier. I thought the airplane was coming apart. I went into what's called compressibility, lost complete control of the aircraft. It felt like the control stick had become unhooked. It was all over the cockpit and nothing happened. And, as I'm going down to lower altitude, the thicker the air got, the more I began to feel something on the stick. I prayed for it to be there, and I began to ease out, and I came out, and would you believe the 262 was right square in front of me. I don't think I moved 2 degrees before I started shooting. And I shot a piece of one wing off and shot the left jet set the left jet on fire. And I was overrunning him, so I pulled off and was going to come back. But by the time I pulled off, he was going straight up. P-51s won't go straight up very long. I tried to go after him, but he was going straight up, and I thought I'd lost him. One jet was burning, and all of a sudden he stopped and started sliding back down, tail first, and he ejected and hung in his parachute. And I felt like the champion of the world. I was ecstatic. In 1996, I think it was, I went to the German fighter pilots meeting and met the pilot I shot down. He and his wife both gave me a big hug. He says, "You saved my life." He said, "I had 25 pilots in my unit when you shot me down." And he said he had a bullet wound in his left side, so he never had to fly again. And because of that, he said 3 weeks later, there were only 4 of my unit alive. And he said, "So you saved my life." I said, "No problem, buddy, anytime."
When the war ended, the new jet fighters like the P-80 and F-86 soon eclipsed the Mustang as America's premier air superiority fighter. But for a fleeting moment, the P-51 had become a king of the skies. But all too soon, the march of technology had bumped it from its throne. Within just a few years of the war's end, the Mustang had been relegated to second-line steps. Altogether, about 15,000 P-51s had been built, but thousands were scrapped wholesale in the months following the end of the war. Others, a precious few, were sold off to racing pilots and enthusiasts. During the first year of the Korean War, the Mustang reclaimed a bit of its lost glory as it was pressed back into service as a ground attack aircraft. But with its vulnerable liquid-cooled engine, the P-51 was replaced as quickly as possible with a more modern jet aircraft. Today, the once mighty horde of the Mustang that conquered the skies of Europe has been reduced to less than 100 flying examples. Every year at air shows throughout the United States, these precious relics take to the air before crowds of thousands, reminding Americans of our proud aviation heritage and those grueling days when the Mustangs filled the skies in a desperate fight for freedom.
Never had anybody say they didn't want to fly. In fact, it was just the other way around. People hanging on my back saying, "Come on, he flew yesterday. I want to put me on today." Does that mean it was fun? No, it's dead serious. We did every job we were given the entire war, and and did them well. It cost us a lot of people. It was another way you proved that what Sherman said was right, that war is hell, and it is.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.